There's something about ancient Egypt that keeps pulling us back. Not just the pyramids, or the mummies, but the strange things. The artifacts no textbook talks about. Objects buried deep in sealed tombs. Devices no one can explain. Symbols that seem to know more than they should. What if Egypt's oldest secrets weren't royal, but technological? No hype, no wild claims, just quiet wonder, and questions that still don't have answers. So grab your blanket, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin beneath the Nile. And as always, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I read every comment, and it means the world. The tools buried beneath the Sphinx. There's something about the Sphinx, not just the size, or the stare, but the silence. A silence that has lasted thousands of years, and under that silence, buried in the sand, are things we're not supposed to talk about. Tools that shouldn't exist, cutting marks that don't match any chisel, and chambers beneath the Sphinx that are still sealed shut. For centuries, explorers have been drawn to the Sphinx like moths to a forgotten flame. Napoleon's men wrote about it. Early British surveyors tried to map it. And in the 1990s, a team of researchers using seismic scans found something strange. Hollow spaces underneath the paws. But no one was allowed to dig deeper. Let's drift into the sand and story. Let's go back to before the pyramids, before dynasties, before even written time. Because the Sphinx might be older than Egypt itself. Carved from a single mass of limestone, the Sphinx has weathered the wind for millennia. But the erosion patterns on its body don't make sense, at least not to geologists. You see, the sides of the Sphinx show signs of water weathering, heavy rain, torrential storms. But the Giza Plateau hasn't seen that kind of rain in over 9,000 years. Which means, the Sphinx was likely carved long before the pharaohs even ruled. So who built it, and why? Beneath it, near its paws, lies a hidden doorway. Closed, undisturbed. In the 1990s, researchers with ground-penetrating radar detected rectangular voids, perfectly shaped chambers, directly underneath the statue. One chamber even aligned with the solar axis. That's not an accident. It's almost as if whoever built the Sphinx knew something, knew the sky, knew the stars, knew how to make time sit still in stone. Now let's talk about the tools. Scattered nearby, around the base, early archaeologists found fragments of what appeared to be drills, but not bronze, not stone. These fragments were oddly shaped, grooved, and burned, as if they had been used at high speeds. Some stone blocks nearby had spiral boreholes, not chisel marks, not hammer lines, spiral cuts, like what you'd see with a modern drill press. Imagine, a tool that could bore through granite, thousands of years before we even knew what torque was. That's what some believe was found here. Even more puzzling are the reports, mostly buried in obscure journals, of unknown alloys near the site. Metal shavings, unlike anything native to ancient Egypt. Metals that resisted corrosion. Metals that rang like bells when struck. Some of these samples vanished into museum vaults. Others were never officially recorded. And then there's the rumor, the one that echoes like a myth in late-night forums and whispered lectures. A chamber beneath the Sphinx, holding not gold, but scrolls. Scrolls of a time before Egypt. A time of engineers, not kings. A civilization that mastered stone, understood sound, and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind tools the sand tried to keep secret. Why has no one opened the chamber? The Egyptian government officially denies its existence, but some say it's not about politics, it's about fear. Because if you open that chamber, you rewrite history, not just a chapter, but the whole book. What if the Sphinx wasn't just a monument, but a marker, a placeholder above an archive, not of religion, but of technology? Some ancient texts, like those from Plato or the Egyptian Book of the Dead, mention an age before the Nile, a time when knowledge was passed down by the bringers of light. Could those texts be referring to this? And if so, what kind of knowledge lies beneath? There's something rhythmic in this desert silence, something pulsing just below the sand, a beat, not of drums, but of memory, a whisper in limestone, a hum in granite. If you stand near the Sphinx long enough, some say you'll feel it, not hear it, feel it, like a low vibration in your chest. Could it be a remnant of something once powered, a system we no longer understand? Maybe the Sphinx wasn't meant to guard a tomb, but a frequency, a library encoded not in language, but in resonance. What we know is limited, what we feel might be closer to the truth. A sealed chamber, unopened, below the oldest statue on Earth, with possible tools made of lost metals, stone cut in ways we can't replicate today, and stories too large for any museum label. That's the quiet truth beneath the Sphinx. Not a monster, not a myth, but a message, waiting to be decoded. And maybe, just maybe, the tools buried below weren't left behind by mistake. Maybe they were meant to be found when we were ready to understand them. The copper chisels that shouldn't have worked. In the heart of ancient Egypt, a land of golden sands and haunting silence, archaeologists unearthed a puzzle that still gnaws at the edges of modern understanding. It begins not with pyramids, not with kings, but with something far more ordinary. A tool, a humble chisel, made of copper. These weren't rare, in fact they were everywhere, scattered around quarries, packed in tombs, left behind in ruined workshops like breadcrumbs from a forgotten era. But the real mystery isn't in the tools themselves, it's in what they were used for. Because lying right next to these soft copper chisels are blocks of granite, not sandstone, not limestone. Granite, harder than steel, denser than anything you'd want to shape with a hammer and a prayer. Even today, our diamond-tipped blades scream when forced through granite. It's no joke. Machines heat up, bits break, dust clouds rise. And here, according to the textbook explanation, copper did the job. Pause and picture that. You have a metal that bends when struck against hard wood, somehow carving stone that can crack drills. And not just any carving. Some of these blocks were shaped with exact angles, precise corners, smooth surfaces, like a machine shop dropped into the past. How? How did soft metal leave marks on stone so tough it shrugs off time? Let's slow down and gently walk through the possibilities. One theory whispers of sand, lots of it. Copper tools, the experts say, may have been used with sand as an abrasive, rubbing and rubbing, pouring grit into every groove until the stone gave way. It's an idea that feels practical, earthy, but also slow, painfully slow. To create what the Egyptians did, using sand and elbow grease alone, would take years, maybe lifetimes. And yet these temples weren't built in centuries. They rose in decades, with thousands of blocks, each shaped, smoothed, and lifted with impossible coordination. Could it really be sand, or was something else at play? Look closer at some of the blocks, particularly in places like Aswan or Giza. You'll notice patterns, curved drill marks that spiral inwards, symmetrical cuts, even scoop-like indentations, the kind you'd expect from something rotating fast, very fast. Now hold that thought. Because next to some of these stones, archaeologists found tubes, hollow copper cylinders, some narrow, some thicker than your wrist, not connected to anything, not sharpened like drills, but hollow and oddly uniform. Why? Did they spin them? With what? Water? Rope? Human hands? Or did these copper tools carry something more? A forgotten technique? A method lost between the pages of history? Some researchers speculate that ancient Egyptians might have mixed copper with something stronger, something no longer surviving in the tools we've recovered. Ancient alloys, acid-based compounds, even at the fringes, traces of ultrasonic technology. Now, that sounds wild. Ultrasound? In Egypt? No wires, no machines, no concrete evidence, just shapes, marks, patterns, and the uncomfortable silence of unanswered questions. Here's something else. At the Serapeum, a dark echoing vault beneath the sands, lie 70-ton sarcophagi, carved with such precision that you can't slide a hair between their seams. Perfect lines, inside and out. If these were made with copper chisels, then those tools should be in museums beside golden crowns, because they'd be the most advanced soft metal instruments in history. But we don't find them. Instead, we find worn-out bits, dull points, tools too weak for the job they supposedly performed. And that contradiction, that's where the mystery lives. Imagine now, under the blistering Egyptian sun, teams of workers striking stone, 1,000 hammers ringing in unison, dust swirling, sweat pouring. And yet, the blocks emerging aren't crude. They're refined, smooth, measured. Where is the trial and error? Where are the mistakes? Even master stone carvers today make errors. They chip, they restart. But in Egypt, from Karnak to Luxor, there's a quiet confidence carved into the walls, like they knew exactly what they were doing. And maybe they did. Some researchers suggest this isn't a question of what tools they used, but who taught them. Because the skills needed to work with granite at this scale suggest more than strength. They suggest method, knowledge, a technique passed down from somewhere or someone else. A civilization before the Egyptians, something older, vanished. The sands hide more than bones. They hide memory, skill, stories ground down by time, and those copper chisels, dulled and forgotten, still whisper the same question. What were we missing? Let that question echo a bit. Breathe with it, because sometimes the best mysteries aren't solved. They're lived, piece by piece, chisel by chisel, and this one is just beginning. The triangle that measures the earth. There's something about the Great Pyramid of Giza that pulls people in. It's not just the size, or the age, or the fact that it still stands after thousands of years. It's something deeper, something in the numbers, something hidden in the angles, the lengths, the very structure of the pyramid itself, something that seems to whisper that whoever built this knew more than we ever thought possible. Let's begin, slowly. When you look at the Great Pyramid, not from the outside, but mathematically, you start to see patterns. Strange, beautiful, and incredibly precise patterns. The base of the pyramid, when measured carefully, gives you something close to a perfect square. The height of the pyramid, when doubled and compared to the perimeter of that square base, gives you a number frighteningly close to pi. That's right, the ancient constant used to measure circles, hidden in a giant triangle made of stone. That alone should make you pause. Because pi wasn't officially calculated or recorded until thousands of years after the pyramid was built. The Greeks, the Babylonians, they get the credit for understanding pi. But this pyramid, sitting in the Egyptian desert long before them, had it built right into its shape. Coincidence? Or a signature? Then there's the golden ratio, another mathematical wonder. It's a ratio that shows up in art, in nature, in the spirals of shells and the growth of plants. Artists and architects from the Renaissance to the modern day have used it for beauty and balance, but the pyramid contains it too. The slant of the sides, the proportion between height and base, it all mirrors the golden ratio, again thousands of years before it was written down in any textbook. It's as if whoever designed it didn't just want a monument, they wanted to lock away a message, a geometric truth, something eternal. But it doesn't stop at pi and the golden ratio. No, the Great Pyramid also encodes the circumference of the Earth. That's right, if you multiply the height of the pyramid by a certain number and adjust for the curvature of the Earth, what you get is terrifyingly close to the distance around our entire planet. And this was supposedly known long before the Earth was proven to be round. How? Some say it's luck, that maybe the ancient Egyptians just stumbled into these numbers by accident while trying to make a pyramid look nice. But the deeper you go, the harder that is to believe. Because these patterns repeat. The angle of the pyramid's slope, it's almost exactly 51.84 degrees, a number that just happens to create a perfect triangle using the golden ratio. That angle also happens to reflect sunlight in a way that makes the pyramid shimmer on the horizon at specific times of year, as if the builders weren't just architects but astronomers and mathematicians. And here's where it gets stranger. Some of the earliest accounts of the pyramid claim it was not even meant as a tomb. In fact, no mummies were ever found inside, no treasures, no sarcophagus that matches the pyramid's scale. Instead, they found what looks more like an echo chamber, resonating frequencies. The granite blocks inside aren't random. They were chosen for their acoustic properties, like tuning forks. Mathematics, geometry, acoustics, astronomy, in a structure older than most of recorded civilization, and it all begins with a triangle. A triangle that doesn't just sit in the sand, it reaches out in every direction, through pi, through phi, through angles and numbers and alignments with the stars. A triangle that, in its silent, unchanging way, measures the Earth, and maybe even something more. Was it built by the Egyptians we know from history books, or by a people who came before them, those the ancient texts call the followers of Horus, or Shemsu-Hor? Were they survivors of some older, forgotten civilization, one with knowledge we still can't fully explain? The stones won't answer, but they hold the numbers, they always have. And in the quiet, when the sun hits just right, and the shadow of the pyramid lies flat against the sand, you can almost feel it, like standing inside an equation, a formula in stone. Sleepy as it may seem, this triangle still watches us, still waiting to be understood. The calendar, hidden beneath the sand. Sometimes, it's not the giant pyramids or the towering statues that whisper the loudest truths about our past. Sometimes, it's the smallest markings on the plainest rocks. Quiet little etchings, half swallowed by sand, that go unnoticed by tourists and barely mentioned in textbooks. But every so often, one of these forgotten relics tells a story that changes everything we thought we knew. Let's begin slow, long before the dynasties of pharaohs, before the Sphinx was carved, before the Nile's banks were lined with temples and tombs. People lived. People watched the skies, tracked the seasons, waited for floods, and needed to understand time. And deep in the Nubian desert, far south of Cairo, archaeologists stumbled on a peculiar site near a place called Nabta Playa. No grand monuments, no palaces, just ancient rock outcrops, half buried, surrounded by stillness. But when they looked closer, really looked, they noticed patterns scratched into the stones, curved lines, clusters of dots, small symbols repeating with eerie precision. At first, no one was sure what to make of them. Then came the idea. What if this was a calendar? Not a random set of marks, but something deliberate. Something scientific, a way to track time. And suddenly, things began to line up. The curved symbols, spaced carefully apart, seemed to correspond with the phases of the moon. Each section mirrored the waxing and waning patterns, 30 marks, just like the 30 nights between new moons. Patterns that reset, again and again, with lunar precision. Now pause there for a moment, because this site dates back to at least 6000 BCE. That's more than 7,000 years ago, long before the Egyptian pyramids, before Stonehenge. before writing, before cities, before pharaohs had names. And yet here was a culture already tracking the skies with a level of awareness that feels almost modern. That's not all. Further excavation revealed stone alignments, carefully arranged to mark the summer solstice, the day when the sun stands still, highest in the sky. The stones formed radial lines pointing toward the horizon, capturing where the sun rose and set on key days. Some of the arrangements even suggested knowledge of stellar movement, of stars like Orion and Sirius, whose cycles marked the flood season of the Nile. It was as if this calendar wasn't just lunar, it was cosmic. But how? How did a society with no written records, no formal temples, no metallurgy, create such a complex timekeeping system? This wasn't just primitive farming observation. This was systematic tracking over generations, watching the sky night after night, marking every phase, waiting for repeat patterns, and then preserving that knowledge, not in scrolls but in stone, so it would last, and it has, for more than 7,000 years. Imagine the patience, the silence of those nights. A small group of people staring at the stars, night after night, year after year, mapping the moon, sensing the seasons, watching the rhythms of the cosmos, and carving their observations into stone. And what's most haunting is that we almost missed it. These rocks sat in the desert for thousands of years, unnoticed, covered in wind-blown sand. But buried underneath was, quite possibly, the oldest working calendar in the world. Older than the Mayan long count, older than Mesopotamian cuneiform, older than the oldest papyrus scroll ever found. And the more you look into Nabta Playa and the carvings nearby, the stranger it gets. Some of the stones are shaped like megaliths, giant standing stones that resemble the early forms of astronomical observatories. Not unlike Stonehenge, but 2,000 years older. They weren't just watching the moon. They may have been mapping the heavens, marking time not only for practical needs, but maybe for ritual, for worship, for memory. This wasn't a lost tribe scratching lines on rocks. This was a civilization, but we don't know their name, we don't know their language, we don't even know what they called the moon. All we know is what they left behind. And somehow, even after millennia, their symbols still work. You can count the marks and follow the moon. The math still checks out. It's as if they made a machine, not of gears and wheels, but of rock and shadow. A clock without hands. A calendar that breathes with the rhythm of the cosmos. And here's the final thought to take with you as you drift off. All around the world, before the rise of cities and kings, there were people quietly watching the stars. People who didn't leave behind stories or sculptures or treasure, but who understood something fundamental about the sky, something we forgot, something we're only now rediscovering. And sometimes, you don't need a temple or a throne to leave behind greatness. Sometimes, all it takes is a few careful marks beneath the sand. That's where time began. That's where the first calendar still sleeps. The black powder of the priests. The first time archaeologists opened a sealed canopic jar from a pre-dynastic Egyptian tomb, they weren't expecting this. They were familiar with the typical resins, the oils, the dried plants, ingredients commonly used in burial rituals. But this time, they found something else. Inside the ancient stone container was a dark, viscous substance, tar-like, heavy, with a scent that didn't belong to any tree or plant found in Egypt or anywhere else nearby. And this wasn't a one-off anomaly. The more jars they opened, the more of this strange black powder they found. Across different tombs, across different regions, across different dynasties, hidden carefully, sometimes layered beneath preserved organs, other times packed tightly into cloth. In some cases it was even smeared across statues, doorways, and ritual tools. No one had a clear explanation. What was this black powder? Why was it used so consistently? And how did the priests of ancient Egypt manage to create a substance that even modern labs struggle to analyze? Let's take a closer look. When you think of ancient Egypt, you picture golden coffins, grand temples, sun gods, and hieroglyphs lining the stone walls. But behind all that splendor was a deeply layered spiritual world, a realm where rituals mattered more than reason, where symbolism was encoded into every grain of sand. The Egyptians believed in transitions, between day and night, between this world and the next, between chaos and order, and in those sacred transitions, substances played a vital role. Oils were not just oils, powders were not just powders. Every material had spiritual weight, and in the center of that sacred toolkit was this black powder. It wasn't just placed randomly. Wherever it was found, it was always involved in transformation, in the embalming process, in gateway rituals, in protective magic. But despite its ritual significance, the ingredients of the powder make little sense. Modern chemists have tested samples in controlled labs. They expected to find things like bitumen, frankincense, or myrrh, ingredients known to ancient Egyptians. Instead, some samples showed elements that didn't match anything found in the Nile Valley. The composition often included rare hydrocarbons, unusual binding agents, even microscopic metal traces in ratios not consistent with natural occurrence. And here's what makes it even more mysterious. In some jars, the black powder was aged but preserved perfectly, as though it had been sealed just days before. The airtight conditions of the tombs may have helped, yes, but the chemical structure of the powder suggests it was already resilient to time, purposefully engineered to last. Was this the result of a lost formula, or something even older? Theories began to circulate. Some scholars proposed that this powder was created using now lost alchemical knowledge, that the priests weren't just using herbs and oils, but were involved in something closer to proto-chemistry, refining, distilling, altering substances at a level we don't usually associate with ancient times. Others suggested a more startling idea, that the powder wasn't from Egypt at all, that it was imported through ancient trade routes or passed down from an even older civilization, one that had already mastered preservation and transformation. Perhaps even a civilization that once lived before the desert sands took over the north of Africa. We know that much of Egypt's early knowledge seems to appear fully formed. There's little evidence of slow evolution in their technology. Their earliest pyramids, for instance, are already advanced. Their earliest tombs already show signs of astronomical alignment and embalming techniques that would take centuries to improve upon. Could the black powder be another echo of this ancient inheritance? Could it be a remnant of something even earlier? There's another detail, and it's subtle. In the burial chambers of certain high priests, symbols appear next to the jars containing this black powder. But these aren't ordinary hieroglyphs. They're often older, simpler, etched instead of painted. Some resemble waves, others look like inverted pyramids. A few are simply spirals, turning inward toward a central point. Researchers have debated the meaning of these marks for decades. Some say they're simply variants of known glyphs, symbols for purification or protection. But others believe these could be remnants of a forgotten script, possibly older than hieroglyphs themselves, a kind of pre-writing, handed down in secret priestly circles. If that's the case, then the powder may have been more than just a ritual item. It could have been part of a hidden language, a material language, where what you burn, smear, or bury speaks as much as any scroll or prayer. The Egyptians believed that substances could hold memory, that you could trap a god's essence in a stone, a feather, or a flame. What if the black powder was meant to hold something, a memory, a spirit, a form of communication? What if it wasn't meant to be used, but to be awakened? Some jars, when exposed to modern light and air, reacted. In a few rare cases, the black powder became effervescent, bubbling softly, as if it had been waiting. In others, it released a faint odor, one that no scientist could replicate in a lab. Described as a cross between ozone and cedar, with a sharpness that lingered in the air. Strange reactions for something that's supposed to be over 3,000 years old. One sample even caused a metal instrument to corrode within hours. Coincidence? Or were the ancient priests sealing something active? And that brings us to the biggest mystery. Why did the knowledge vanish? We have tombs, we have jars, we have symbols, but we have no record of how this powder was made. No recipe, no scroll, no preserved chant or incantation. Nothing. As if the process was deliberately removed from the written world, hidden in oral traditions or buried along with those who knew it. Could it be that the powder was considered too powerful, that only a handful of high initiates were allowed to even touch it? And if so, who were they? Were these priests the last torchbearers of a far older order, a brotherhood that predated Egypt's dynasties, that inherited secret knowledge from a civilization we no longer remember? In the end, we are left with a dark substance in a sealed jar, thousands of years old, still potent, still reactive, still unknown. A powder that modern science can't recreate. A ritual tool that may not have been Egyptian in origin. A black memory, trapped in clay, whispering across the centuries. And when we stare at it, under sterile lab lights, we are not just studying the past, we are looking into a mystery that has outlived empires. A riddle of transformation, a secret burned into shadow, and a question still waiting for its answer. The satellite view carving in the desert. There is a place in Egypt where the wind never quite settles the sand. A place just a few miles northwest of the Giza Plateau, Abu Rawash, where the desert stretches out into nothing, until something strange comes into view. From the ground you'd walk right past it, just wind-blown dust, maybe a few rocks, nothing special. But then, lift yourself just a few hundred feet up, and the entire landscape changes. Etched into the earth, massive geometric forms begin to appear. Too straight, too uniform, too deliberate, like lines drawn by a ruler on the surface of a map. Some call them land glyphs, others think they are ancient surveying lines. But to the satellite's eye, they look like something drawn for someone flying above. And that's the first mystery. Because thousands of years ago, no one should have been able to see this carving from the sky. And yet, it's there, perfectly visible. Markings in the desert that don't match any known Egyptian construction pattern. Archaeologists have long puzzled over Abu Rawash for other reasons. The unfinished pyramid nearby, the displaced casing stones, the awkward placement of its ruins. But these massive patterns carved into the land, they weren't part of any official monument. They're not mentioned in hieroglyphs. No one ever claimed credit for them, and yet they remain, silently visible only when the desert is seen from above. If you zoom out further using modern tools, drones, satellite photos, even Google Earth, the patterns become even more surreal. In one area, the carvings resemble intersecting grids, like a primitive map. In another, there's what looks like a spiral, and just beyond that, something like a compass. But what were these meant for? The first theory offered is that they were Old Roman or modern British survey marks, but that doesn't hold. Some of these carvings have erosion that dates them far beyond the colonial period. Some appear buried beneath layers of sediment, requiring thousands of years of natural buildup. That led others to propose something more daring. What if these were navigation symbols, ancient markers intended for those in the sky? Could it be that long before flight as we know it, someone had the perspective to see the Earth this way? Some have proposed ancient hot air balloons or gliders. Wild, yes. But even more curious is this. Several ancient texts from Egypt and Sumeria reference beings that descended from above and rode on the winds. Even the term Shemsu-Hor, the mythical followers of Horus, describes a civilization that came from the sky and measured the land from above. If we're to believe these accounts as more than metaphor, then maybe Abu Rawash's carvings weren't for humans on the ground. Maybe they were signals, markers, guides. Even more curious are the exact coordinates of some of these patterns. When plotted, a few of them align perfectly with celestial phenomena. One of the spirals matches the layout of the northern sky's star trails. Another grid pattern seems to correspond with solstice shadow lines. These aren't random scratches, they're intentional, aligned, and precise. But what's even more strange, none of this was even noticed until satellites became common. The carvings were likely visible from ancient high vantage points, perhaps pyramid tops or cliff edges, but their full geometry, only from the air, something the ancients were never supposed to have. So who carved them? And how did they know what these patterns would look like from above? One theory suggests ground mapping tools using ropes, plumb lines, and stellar alignment. That might explain how they got them straight. But it doesn't explain why they drew such massive geometric figures, with no obvious earthly use. You wouldn't build a temple this way. You wouldn't bury a king in this pattern. You wouldn't farm with it, or use it for water. The only purpose that fits? Visibility. From the sky. Some argue this could have been a message, a symbol not for humans but for something or someone, watching from above. Now consider this. All across the globe, similar land patterns appear. The Nazca lines of Peru, the Sajama lines in Bolivia, the giant geoglyphs of Kazakhstan. They too only make sense from above. And just like Abu Rawash, no one knows who made them. Could this be evidence of a forgotten global knowledge, one that transcended borders, that left messages not in temples or scrolls but across entire landscapes? And what about the erosion? Some geologists have noted that the carvings in Abu Rawash show signs of extreme weathering, possibly even predating the dynastic Egyptians. If true, this would suggest that the markings were created before the pyramids, maybe before recorded Egyptian history even began. That places them into the murky zone of pre-Egypt, a time that official records simply don't describe. A time, perhaps, when another civilization now forgotten walked this land. They didn't build pyramids, they didn't leave statues, but they left something that only someone in the sky would understand. Patterns in the sand, symbols you'd never see unless you knew to look from above. Even now, satellite imagery reveals new shapes near Abu Rawash, suggesting the area hasn't even been fully mapped. What's buried just beneath the surface? What remains half hidden by the wind and time? We may never know, but sometimes what we see from above tells us more about the past than what we find buried in the ground. So if you ever find yourself staring down at the earth from far above, remember, there are messages waiting, etched into the land, whispering across millennia, waiting for someone who can finally understand. The flask that boiled without fire. In the dry heart of an ancient necropolis near Abydos, among broken tiles and wind-blown fragments of forgotten rituals, a glimmering object was discovered. Shattered, yes, but still holding a strange sheen, like glass, but thicker, stranger. It was a flask, or rather, what was left of one. But the real mystery wasn't its shape, it was what was inside, and what wasn't. There was no trace of fire, no smoke, no soot-blackened surface, like the kind you'd find on pottery used for boiling or brewing. And yet this object had been boiled. The inner surface of the fragments showed clear patterns, ripples, tiny fractures, expansion bubbles, like a kettle brought to rolling heat. Scientists were baffled. For a reaction that intense, some source of flame or external heat was expected, but there was none, not even the faintest trace of combustion. So what boiled it? Could it have been a reaction, something chemical, something deliberate? The more the fragments were analyzed, the stranger the results became. Some of the material on the inside was tested against known substances from the dynastic period, resins, oils, bitumen, even imported compounds from Nubia and the Levant. Nothing matched. The molecular signatures hinted at synthetic reactions, reactions that would require knowledge of heat transfer, containment, and controlled energy release. And yet, this flask was older than the pyramids. It was dug from a layer of sediment dated over 7,000 years ago, before the pharaohs, before the temples, before history even began to write itself. Let that sink in. Who was experimenting with chemical reactions back then? Even stranger, this wasn't an isolated find. Other fragments, similar in shape, with similar strange residues, have shown up in places like Saqqara, Edfu, and even off the coast of Alexandria. Scattered pieces, like pages torn from a textbook, too advanced to be believed. One theory suggests these could have been used in early alchemy. Not the kind we think of from medieval Europe, but something even earlier, proto-alchemical knowledge, passed down orally or lost in time. A civilization that didn't just crush herbs or burn incense, but who understood transformation at a molecular level. The manipulation of heat without flame, energy without combustion, rhythmic hums, vibrating chambers, resonance that could heat liquids without touching them. It sounds fantastical until you remember that we use microwaves to do just that. But microwaves are a 20th century invention, or so we think. What if this flask was evidence of a long-lost method, an ancient process that heated from within? It's possible they used natural piezoelectric materials, crystals that could generate localized heat through vibration. Some scholars believe early Egyptians had access to such stones, like tourmaline and quartz. Was the flask part of an early forgotten science? There are inscriptions too, faint etchings, circular, almost mathematical, on the outside surface of one fragment. Not hieroglyphs, not pictograms, more like code, a language of symbols, geometry and intention, lines that repeat, arcs that curve in ratios. Some believe these are formulas, others believe they are frequencies. The quietest theory, the one archaeologists don't publish, says this flask was part of a machine, not a standalone object, but a component, something slotted in, maybe into a cradle, maybe into a stone panel or holder carved into bedrock. There's even mention of a sun chamber in one old expedition report, a place said to amplify light and sound. If that chamber existed, and this flask was part of it, what were they trying to create? Not potions, not medicine, but something bigger, something energetic, a reaction harnessed, a reaction used. Was this ancient Egypt's lost science? Not the pyramids, not the monuments, but the quiet, invisible technologies, chemical, acoustic, energetic, that disappeared with the last true priest engineers of a forgotten world. And then we ask again, why no soot? Why no burns? Because maybe, just maybe, fire was never needed. The pillars with melted symbols. Imagine standing in the desert, deep in Egypt's southern reaches. No tourists, no signs, just dust, cracked stones, and a heat that doesn't seem to come from the sun alone. You're walking through a forgotten site, off the maps, off the records, rarely whispered about even by the locals. Then, you see them. Pillars, half buried in sand, massive, upright, ancient, weathered, yes, but not just by time, not just by the wind. The glyphs carved into them don't look eroded, they look melted, as if the symbols themselves were burned into the stone, and then began to drip, warped like wax left too close to a flame. But this isn't wax, this is limestone, and granite, and some strange dark mineral that doesn't even belong in this region. Stone shouldn't do this, not without heat, beyond anything the ancient world was supposed to have, and yet here it is, right in front of you, and suddenly the desert feels quieter than it did a moment ago. These pillars were discovered decades ago, south of Abydos, buried beneath layers of wind-blown earth. Official excavations were limited, mostly because there wasn't funding or political interest. But the first team that uncovered them, they didn't forget. They called them the Dead Pillars. Not because of what they found, but because of what they felt. The columns are laid out in a formation that doesn't match any known temple or structure. No roof once sat on top. No walls surrounded them. Instead, they stand alone, aligned in 3 rows like sentinels. Each pillar stands at a slightly different height, and each one is covered in inscriptions that once told a story. But not anymore. Those glyphs have run. They appear to have liquefied at some point in history, flowing downward, freezing mid-drip. But there's no sign of fire, no soot, no scorch marks, no ash. And the strangest part? Only the glyphs are melted. The rest of the pillars are untouched, smooth, stable, intact. Let's pause here. To melt stone, not just crack it or chip it, you need sustained temperatures in the range of 1200 to 1700 degrees Celsius. That's beyond anything an ancient torch or open flame could manage. That's forge-level heat, or something else entirely. So what happened here? Some researchers believe it was a natural occurrence, an earthquake, perhaps, or extreme weather. But those ideas fall apart under scrutiny. There's no pattern of regional volcanism, no nearby meteor impacts, no wildfires hot enough, focused enough, controlled enough to cause this exact effect, at this exact location, and on only the glyphs. Others point to something far stranger. In 2010, a group of independent researchers performed unauthorized scans of the area using ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR. The results, never published in any official academic journal, were leaked online. They claimed that the pillars aren't made from regular limestone. Microscopic analysis suggested the presence of quartz, barium, and another unidentified compound with high resonance capability. Resonance, that's important, because one of the theories that's gained quiet popularity is the idea of harmonic energy, sound waves, or frequencies capable of affecting physical matter. Not sound you can hear, but something deeper, something the earth might produce, or amplify. According to this theory, the pillars weren't carved with symbols, they were encoded. The glyphs weren't just writing, they were inscriptions meant to receive or transmit a specific frequency, a language, for energy, and whatever caused them to melt, it was the frequency being activated. Ancient Egyptian mythology has hints, strange ones. Stories of gods who spoke worlds into existence, of powerful words that could reshape the physical, of priests who used sacred tones to awaken statues, open hidden doors, or send messages through stone. To the modern mind, it sounds poetic. But what if it wasn't? What if it was literal? There's a record, barely translated, of a high priest in the court of Dusur, who describes stones that answer when called by name. It was dismissed as metaphor. Until now. Because when researchers ran vibration tests near the melted glyphs, the stone responded. Frequencies between 18-22 Hz, just below human hearing, triggered measurable micro-vibrations in the affected areas, but not anywhere else on the pillar. It's as if the glyphs had memory. One fragment found near the site was a small disc of polished stone, about the size of a palm, perfectly smooth, no markings, just one shallow groove circling the outer edge. Under magnification, the groove was revealed to be notched, like it was meant to spin, or fit into something. Some believe it was part of a focusing device. A lens not for light, but for sound, something that could direct energy with pinpoint precision. What if the ancient Egyptians, at least the ones who used this site, weren't just building temples? What if they were engineering frequencies? A controversial theory, very controversial, suggests that these pillars may have been part of a forgotten experiment, a form of ancient energy technology based not on combustion, but on vibration, like tuning forks, like resonating quartz. If that's true, it changes everything. It suggests they didn't lose knowledge, they just used a different kind of science, one we stopped listening to. And there's something else. A handful of locals claim that every few years, just before the equinox, strange sounds come from the site. Low hums, pulses, rhythmic vibrations that rattle the chest. No animals live near the pillars. Birds avoid the area. Even insects seem absent, as if the place is still active, still listening, still remembering. So what are we looking at here? Just melted rock? Or a message? Were the glyphs burned by heat? Or rewritten by sound? Was this a temple? Or an ancient instrument? And if someone or something triggered that instrument long ago, what did it do? What was the purpose? A warning? A signal? Or something far beyond either? The pillars don't answer, but they stand, and somewhere, beneath the melted symbols, the stone still hums, waiting. The panel with moving dials. Sometimes, the past refuses to sit still. Sometimes, it moves, it turns, it ticks. Imagine stepping into a sealed chamber beneath the sands of Egypt, a tomb unopened for over 3,000 years. The stone doorway creaks as it breaks the silence of centuries. Inside, nothing stirs. The air is thick, still, and dry. The walls are lined with faded murals, and the ground is carpeted in layers of dust. But in one corner of the chamber, half buried beneath slabs of stone, something strange catches your eye. At first, it appears to be just part of the wall, a rounded stone panel embedded into a carved recess. But as your flashlight beam sweeps across it, you notice something odd. Small circular indents, like dials. Not decorations, not hieroglyphs, dials. Curious, you kneel, brushing away centuries of sand and grit, Your fingers touch one of the stone circles. It shifts, just slightly, but undeniably, it moves. And suddenly, everything you know about ancient Egypt begins to fall apart. This object is impossible. The tomb is estimated to date from Egypt's late period, around 664 to 332 BCE. The panel embedded in the stone should have crumbled with time. No wooden gears, no metal pins, and yet, here it is, still intact, still functional, still turning. As archaeologists began to examine the find, the comparisons to the Antikythera mechanism in Greece were immediate. A rotary dial system, dozens of them actually, protected inside a sealed casing. But where the Greek mechanism was made of bronze and showed signs of corrosion, this panel is different. It's made of an unidentifiable alloy, a strange blend of copper, quartz, and something else, something not yet classified. High-resolution scans revealed internal cogs, layered structures, some as small as coins, others as wide as a man's hand. The gears interlock, intricately, and seem designed to move in specific sequences. But how could such precision engineering exist in ancient Egypt? Even stranger, when researchers rotated one of the outer rings to a certain position, another dial, embedded deeper, moved on its own, as if linked, as if calibrated, as if powered. And yet, there is no power source. Initial theories ranged from the plausible to the unthinkable. Some suggested it was an elaborate calendar. Others called it an astrological computer, perhaps tracking lunar or solar alignments. But none of the known celestial patterns matched the dial markings. One gear appears to have 37 teeth, another has 256. A few contain ratios eerily close to pi or the golden ratio. None of it makes sense within the context of Egyptian dynastic history. But if this wasn't made by the Egyptians we know, who was it made by? More unsettling are the inscriptions around the panel. Unlike traditional hieroglyphs, they are circular, repetitive, and oddly mathematical. Each dial is ringed with a set of glyphs no expert has been able to translate. They're not phonetic, they seem algorithmic. Some have even suggested that the panel was part of a computational device. But what kind of computation could it perform, and for what purpose? And why bury it? The chamber in which it was found contained no sarcophagus, no offerings, no traces of human burial, just walls of plain stone, and the panel. It feels less like a tomb, and more like a vault. One theory, quietly discussed among a handful of engineers, is that the panel may have been an ancient form of control system, not for magic, not for astronomy, but for machinery. What kind of machinery? No one knows. Other tombs in the same region have yielded strange devices, bronze coils, stone tubes with magnetic residue, and crystalline rods that show signs of heating from within. Could they all be related? Could the desert be hiding remnants of a technological culture long lost to time? Some whisper that the panel may have been part of a much larger device, something buried across multiple sites, long disconnected, its parts scattered or sealed to keep them hidden. And yet, the more we try to study it, the more elusive it becomes. A research team from Germany attempted to replicate the design using 3D printed models, but every version failed to rotate smoothly. None mimicked the delicate interlocking motion of the original. Even stranger, infrared scans showed that some dials emit faint, ambient heat, not enough to feel, but measurable. In a room kept at constant temperature, the panel subtly warms itself. There are no electronics, no wires, nothing artificial, but something lingers. Was it left as a message, a relic, or a test? The idea that an ancient civilization, predating dynastic Egypt, could engineer such complexity has long been dismissed by mainstream academia. But this find, this stubbornly silent mechanism, refuses to go away. And the longer it exists without answers, the more it erodes our timeline. It doesn't matter whether you believe in lost civilizations or not. The panel is real. Its dials move. Its origin is unknown. And it's not alone. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed similar anomalies beneath nearby ruins. In temples, under streets, inside sealed pyramids, there may be more. But for now, only this one has surfaced. It rests in a secure vault in Cairo, studied daily, its dials turned carefully, one at a time. No one turns all of them. Not yet. Some fear that aligning them all might trigger something. Not an explosion, but a message, a signal, a memory of something long buried, something that once pulsed with intelligence and purpose, and now, after millennia of silence, might awaken once more. The mechanism in the pharaoh's footprint. When workers excavated a sandstone platform at the base of an unnamed statue believed to be a minor pharaoh from Egypt's Middle Kingdom, they didn't expect anything unusual. These statues are common. They line temple corridors, rest beside forgotten tombs, and gather dust in museums. But this statue was different, not because of its appearance, but because of what lay beneath it. At first, it was just a smooth stone base. typical, unremarkable. But when the digging team lifted the pedestal from the foundation to catalog it, one of them noticed a strange sound, a faint clicking or rattling beneath the stone slab. Something was inside the base, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Curious and careful, they removed a layer of limestone filler, and there, embedded in the sediment, was a sealed stone capsule. Oval, smooth, almost like an egg, but heavier than it should have been. It wasn't carved in the usual Egyptian style. It didn't bear any inscriptions, no cartouches, no hieroglyphs. It was blank, as if it came from another tradition entirely. When they opened the capsule under lab conditions weeks later, what they found inside was beyond baffling. Tucked within a crystalline shell were 3 interlocking gears, metallic, though not made of any known Egyptian alloy. The gear teeth were clean, precise, and meshed together in a way that suggested rotation, movement. One of the pieces had a finely etched line that resembled a calibration mark, like something you'd find in a compass or a surveying tool. But this object was sealed beneath a statue dating back nearly 3,800 years, and that's the first real puzzle. Not only did the gears survive, the entire mechanism seemed functional. No rust, no breakdown, as if it had been protected for millennia, intentionally. But why? Archaeologists called in metallurgists, physicists, engineers. What they discovered was that the materials used in the mechanism weren't native to the Nile Valley. In fact, one of the components contained traces of molybdenum, an element that doesn't appear in Egyptian artifacts until the 20th century. But even more unsettling, the design of the gear system resembled the layout of a modern harmonic drive, an advanced form of gear reduction system used in robotics. Except this one was ancient. How could this be? Some researchers wondered if the artifact had somehow been planted, if it was modern contamination. But the sediment surrounding the capsule matched the original strata. The mineralization patterns were consistent with being buried for centuries. No modern tampering could explain it. Then came the carbon dating of the capsule's sealant. It placed the outer shell, not the statue but the capsule itself, as older than the statue it was hidden under. Centuries older. So now you have a device that predates the object meant to conceal it, a mechanism more advanced than anything else from its time. Buried not in a palace but under a relatively obscure statue, in a corner of a necropolis, rarely visited by tourists or even scholars. Could it have been a form of celestial tracker, a navigation tool, some kind of computational mechanism? A few fringe researchers have drawn parallels to the Antikythera mechanism, found off the coast of Greece, and dating back to around 100 BCE. But this object, this hidden gear system in Egypt, it was far older, and unlike Antikythera, there was no reason for it to exist. No writings reference it, no blueprints, no mention in temple scrolls. It's as if it was placed there quietly and deliberately, to wait. But wait for what? What's more curious is the orientation of the gears. When reconstructed digitally, the rotation pattern aligns with certain star constellations, specifically Orion, which the ancient Egyptians believed was connected to the afterlife and the god Osiris. That can't be a coincidence. But the precision required to build something like that, where did it come from? Maybe this wasn't Egyptian in origin. Maybe it was something they inherited from a culture even older. A civilization whose knowledge had been buried or forgotten, one whose tools still linger beneath stone, sand, and time. It makes you wonder what else lies beneath Egypt's countless statues. What other ancient mechanisms might be hidden in the shadows of granite feet and limestone plinths? How many secrets are trapped beneath the weight of dynasties and forgotten gods? As you imagine that silent machine, turning once more in its mind's eye, click, tick, click, drifting softly back into motion after a sleep that lasted millennia, ask yourself, did someone want it to be found, or was it hidden for a reason? And if so, what reason could possibly justify sealing such knowledge away? Let that question sit with you, gently, like sand blown over a secret, like gears waiting patiently beneath stone, like time itself, whispering quietly in circles, always turning, but never speaking. Sleep now, let the mystery spin, just beyond the reach of firelight. It turns, softly, silently, waiting. The coins that spoke in light. In a quiet corner of Egypt's western desert, beyond the usual archaeological circuits and away from the Nile's lifeblood, a small team of surveyors stumbled across something strange, something too small to be noticed by most. Scattered just beneath the surface of a collapsed mud brick wall were a series of thin, coin-like objects, no inscriptions, no carvings, no symbols, just small, perfectly round metallic discs. At first glance, they didn't seem extraordinary. They were smaller than typical coinage, too light to feel valuable, and lacked any clear sign of origin. But there was something odd, something off. When the light hit them at the right angle, these tiny discs shimmered, not with a shine, but with a glow. Not like gold or bronze or silver, but like something reflective on a different spectrum. One of the archaeologists noticed that when the sunlight passed through dust above the coin, the disk flashed in a sequence of faint colored pulses. Green, then violet, then blue, always in the same order. No one could explain it. It wasn't the material reflecting the sun like a mirror, it was reacting to it. The coins, if you could even call them that, were tested. All 23 of them had the exact same diameter, same thickness, same texture. But under analysis, the alloy was unfamiliar. It didn't match anything found in the known Egyptian metallurgical record, not even close. The surface contained elements rarely found together, like tellurium and yttrium, yet somehow bonded into a form that modern labs could barely replicate. What was even stranger, the disks weren't uniform in their color pulses. Each had a distinct spectral signature. When exposed to directed light, like a laser beam, each coin reflected a precise sequence, like a coded message. And it wasn't random. It repeated, like a pattern, like a key. Some began to suspect the objects were part of a signaling system, perhaps used for communication, perhaps ceremonial. But that's where the trouble began, because nothing in Egyptian history, pre-dynastic or otherwise, includes anything like this. No records, no tools, no language system based on light modulation, nothing. That made the coins, if they were coins at all, something else. Something outside the accepted timeline. One possibility proposed by a cryptographer involved photonic data encoding. Modern science uses similar principles in fiber optics and communication systems. But these disks were dated using contextual clues, ceramics, soil layering, plant residue, and the context suggested a timeline older than Egypt's first dynasty. Older even than the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. That would place them not just before pyramids or pharaohs, but before writing itself. How could that be? Some suggested the coins weren't Egyptian at all. Maybe they were left behind by a now lost culture. Maybe they drifted into the Nile Valley from a place even older, carried over generations before finally being buried and forgotten. Others believe they were designed to be discovered later, planted deliberately. A message meant not for the ancient world, but for us. An even stranger theory emerged when one researcher mapped the pulse sequences from the disks onto astronomical data. Each light pattern, when stretched out as a waveform, seemed to correspond to known pulsar signals in deep space. Could the disks have acted as ancient receivers? Or transmitters? Skeptics scoffed, of course. They always do. There's no place in standard Egyptology for metal disks that communicate with stars. But those who spent time with the coins, who sat with them late at night in lab rooms with the lights off, swore by something else. They claimed the disks made sounds, not mechanical, not electrical, but soft hums. Only when the room was completely dark. As if the absence of light allowed something to shift inside them. A vibration, a murmur. Faint, but real. And then, there was the last one. The 23rd disc. It didn't shimmer. It didn't pulse. When placed near the others, it silenced them. No reflections. No hums. Just stillness. As if it turned off whatever the others were doing. Some researchers called it the stop coin. Others, more superstitious, refused to touch it at all. There's something unsettling about a piece of metal that turns off light. The current theory? That the discs were part of a system, a method of recording, or encoding, or signaling something across distance. Maybe between places, maybe between people, or maybe between species. No one knows. Not really, and no one has ever found discs like them again. The site where they were discovered has since collapsed under shifting desert winds. Attempts to dig deeper were halted when the local groundwater rose unexpectedly, flooding the trench and causing part of the dig wall to fall in. The site is now off limits, both due to safety and what officials have vaguely called cultural sensitivity. But the coins remain in storage, under strict conditions, and one is always monitored. The 23rd disc, still dark, still silent, still waiting. What message, if any, were they meant to send? What light were they designed to catch? And what if we were never meant to find them in the first place? Let your thoughts drift quietly now. The coins are still, the pulse is gone, but somewhere, in the deep silence between stars, maybe something echoes, maybe someone listens, or waits. Close your eyes, let the shimmer fade, let the questions rest. In the dark, even metal can whisper, and in sleep, maybe you'll hear what it's trying to say. The Flying Disc Mural. Somewhere deep inside the Temple of Hathor, in Dendera, Egypt, there is a hallway bathed in silence. The stone walls have not heard a chisel in over 1,000 years. The faint scent of dust and time clings to the air, and the flicker of lanterns dances across carvings, older than the memory of empires. But there, on the ceiling, a place few look carefully, is a carving that doesn't belong. Or perhaps, it does. It's simply that we have forgotten why. The carving is often called the Dendera Light, or the Flying Disc, and at first glance it's easy to dismiss as just another hieroglyph in a temple filled with thousands. But spend a moment with it, just a slow, lingering moment, and something starts to feel off. There's a strange shape, long and rounded like a bulb, or maybe like a glass pod. Wavy lines flow from it like energy. A cable-like tail connects it to what looks like a box or coil, and nearby, a priest holds what seems to be a control rod. Modern eyes see it, and they whisper, "This looks like technology. This looks like flight. This looks like something from another time, perhaps another world." And the question forms, quietly at first, then louder with each moment. How did this image end up here, carved into solid stone more than 2,000 years ago? In most ancient temples, carvings are symbolic. The gods, the pharaohs, the rituals, they all carry layers of spiritual meaning. But this mural doesn't follow the usual pattern. For one thing, it's astonishingly mechanical in appearance. The bulb has been interpreted by some scholars as a lotus flower, a common motif in Egyptian art. But that explanation falters when you notice the cable-like stem and the box connected to it. The Egyptians didn't just carve randomly. Every line had purpose, every curve had meaning, so why would they depict a flower emitting energy? Let's imagine something. A moment in time. A priest stands beneath this very ceiling, thousands of years ago. He looks up, not with confusion, but with understanding. Maybe this wasn't a mystery to him. Maybe this was instruction, a diagram, a representation of something they were taught to use, or simply observe. What makes the mural even more curious is its placement. It lies in a crypt, a room that wasn't open to the public, that likely only priests or high initiates ever entered. A room without windows, a room without torches on the walls. Why? Because the soot from open flames could damage the delicate murals. And that leads to a deeper question. If there were no torches allowed, how did they light the room to carve the walls? Suddenly, the carving isn't just art, it's a potential answer. Could this be a memory of a lost lighting device, a kind of ancient lamp or energy source used only by select few? Is it symbolic or literal? That's where the debate begins and refuses to end. There's a long history of unconventional artifacts in Egypt. Objects and images that don't make sense until we dare to step outside the accepted narrative, and this mural is one of them. In the 1960s, when photographs of the Dendera mural spread, alternative historians and engineers began examining the strange shapes. An Austrian engineer named Walter Garn compared it to a Crookes tube, an early electrical device that emits a glow when voltage is applied in a vacuum. The comparison was striking. The shape, the connections, even the serpent inside the bulb matched the visual of an electrified gas filament. Could the ancient Egyptians have possessed some form of electrical knowledge? It sounds impossible until you look at how precise their work was. Carvings on granite, stone aligned with the stars, cut marks so clean that modern tools struggle to replicate them, and now, maybe a diagram of a device mistaken for a flower. Let's slow down here. Let the pace rest. Let the idea settle in like dust over old stone. There are theories, some more grounded than others. The mainstream scholars argue that this mural is symbolic, representing creation and life, not electricity or technology. That the bulb is simply the womb of Nut, the sky goddess, or a snake emerging from a lotus. But even they admit, this mural is different. The sheer presence of the coiled wire, the tube-like shapes, the box at the end, it doesn't match any other iconography of the era. And more importantly, why is it so hidden? Why place it in a dark, secretive chamber if it were just a mythological image? Why indeed? Some visitors to Dendera have reported something odd while standing under the mural, a strange hum in their ears, a sensation of static in the air, a feeling like the stones themselves remember something, something electric, something forgotten. Of course, there's no proof of that, no readings, no measurements, just feeling. But feelings, in places like these, carry weight. They whisper of memories not written, they echo truths not spoken, and when you stare at that disc, carved so carefully, so deliberately, you wonder if perhaps the artists were preserving something they were told never to speak aloud. A technology glimpsed, a mystery kept, a moment in time sealed in limestone. Let's drift into the past again. Imagine a workshop, not modern, but ancient, not bustling with machines, but echoing with chants, priests and artisans, scrolls and symbols, a quiet energy moving between hands and stone, an object brought into the room, gleaming, glowing, or maybe just misunderstood, and a command, record this, for it will be needed again. And so they did. They didn't write it in words, they carved it in picture, because pictures endure, and this one has endured. There are skeptics, of course, always are. They'll say there's no evidence of electrical devices in ancient Egypt, no batteries, no wires, no carbon filament bulbs. But sometimes, lack of evidence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes, it means we haven't been looking in the right place, or with the right eyes. And sometimes, what we call evidence only makes sense once we let go of what we think we know. Could the Dendera mural be nothing more than a symbolic depiction of creation? Perhaps. Could it be a misunderstood record of lost technology? Maybe. But here's the most curious part. Why do we feel the need to explain it away? Why does the image press so deeply into our imagination? Why does it look so eerily familiar? Maybe because we've seen something like it before, in dreams or in the sky. Maybe because it taps into something old inside us. Something that remembers light without fire, energy without wires, knowledge without explanation. And maybe, just maybe, the people who carved this ceiling weren't trying to mystify us. Maybe they were trying to tell us something. So next time you hear the term flying disc, don't think just of modern UFOs or science fiction. Think of the Temple of Hathor. Think of stone that hums with silence. Think of a carving, high above your head, shaped like a light bulb, coiled with mystery, connected to nothing, yet somehow, speaking still. In the quiet of Dendera, something waits, and whether it's a symbol, or a memory, or a warning, it was never meant to be forgotten. The brick that resonates. They found it by accident, buried beneath layers of wind-blown dust and forgotten history, just another brick in the foundation of an ancient crumbling wall. At first glance it looked no different than the others. Weathered sandstone, maybe a little smoother, maybe a little less worn. But when the archaeologist brushed it clean and accidentally tapped the corner with his pick, a clear tone rang out. Not a thud, not a dull clunk, but a pitch, sharp, bright, almost musical. A sound that didn't belong in the silence of the Egyptian desert. The team paused, looked around, tapped it again. The sound rang true. One brick, one sound. A perfect note, like something you'd hear in a carefully tuned instrument, not in the base of an ancient ruin. They pulled it free, slowly and carefully. Around it, nothing else like it. Every other stone was dead and silent. This one alone sang. No visible difference. Same dimensions, same material, same color. But something was inside. When they brought it back to the lab, they expected to find a hollow, maybe an air pocket, maybe a chamber, something that would explain the resonance. But scans showed it was solid, not partially hollow, not tricked with an inserted shell, completely solid stone, yet it rang. And it didn't just ring, it sang in frequency. Under acoustic testing, the brick vibrated at exactly 432 Hz, a tone some call the natural frequency of Earth. A tone tied to ancient instruments, to forgotten healing rituals, and to monuments believed to have harmonic design. Coincidence? Or something designed? Now the strange part. They cut a slice, just a sliver off the edge to test the composition, and what they found shocked them. It wasn't just sandstone. It had microscopic traces of quartz, just enough to enable resonance, but not enough to be noticeable on sight. And more importantly, the grain alignment inside the brick showed signs of manipulation. The inner layers weren't formed randomly like natural stone. They looked layered, almost like they'd been melted, poured, and cast, then tuned. Tuned, like a tuning fork, like a bell, like someone had crafted this stone to vibrate on purpose. But who would do that? And more importantly, why? The site where it was found wasn't a temple, not a palace, not even a tomb. It was the wall of a storage chamber, plain, square, and unassuming. So why embed a sonic brick into the foundation? That's when another researcher remembered something strange. In the ancient texts, scribbled onto shards of broken pottery and faded scrolls, there were references to singing stones, stones used in construction rituals, stones that aligned the walls or kept the spirit of the structure in harmony. Most scholars dismiss that as metaphor, but what if it wasn't? What if, in the chaos of wind, dust, and centuries, a single engineered brick had survived, a remnant of an acoustic architecture now completely forgotten? Even stranger, sound mapping of the chamber where it had been found revealed something else. The room, if modeled digitally, had perfect acoustic symmetry. If the resonant brick had been placed in the right location, it would have created standing waves. That's a kind of sound pattern where the frequency doesn't just bounce, but stays in place, amplified, focused. The brick wasn't just singing, it was part of a system, one that used stone and air to shape sound. And that idea opens doors. Because there are legends. Ancient stories that whisper of buildings that could sing, walls that hummed, and even temples that responded to chant. There are old accounts from travelers who spoke of rooms where the voice would echo forever, without a single architectural explanation. Could this one brick be proof? Proof that ancient builders had an understanding of resonance, frequency, and vibrational energy far beyond what we've ever credited them. The questions keep building. If they could tune one stone, could they tune many? What would happen if a room had 12 of these bricks, or 50? Could they channel sound in a way we can't detect anymore? Could they use sound to shape space, or even at the edge of speculation, to lift? There are claims, unproven but persistent, that the great blocks of the pyramids were not dragged by hand, but lifted using sound. Crazy, maybe. But this one brick hums with a reminder. we still don't know everything. Today, that resonant stone is locked in a research lab. They test it, scan it, tap it again and again. Each time it sings the same note. Clear, pure, purposeful, and each time, no one can explain how. It sits on a white table, under sterile lights, surrounded by instruments far more advanced than anything the ancients had. But none of them can make another like it. They've tried, mimicked the composition, matched the quartz ratio, recreated the grain layering, but their copies stay silent. Only the original sings, a hidden song in the earth's bones, and sometimes, in forgotten corners of the desert, that song still plays, in a single brick, one that resonates when everything else falls silent. The crystal map under the sand. There's a place in the desert where compasses go quiet, where the wind uncovers things that shouldn't exist. And just beyond the curve of the Siwa oasis, where sand has swallowed entire cities, archaeologists found something odd. Not made of stone, not metal, but crystal, polished, transparent, and impossibly geometric. It wasn't a statue, it wasn't a vessel. It looked like a map, a fractured plate of shimmering quartz etched with precise lines and curves. Some curved outward, like topographic ridges. Others formed star-like angles, almost like constellations. At first they thought it was decorative, but the deeper they studied it, the less sense it made, because the lines weren't random. They weren't Egyptian. They were mathematical. The team had no idea where it came from. It wasn't listed in any temple inventory. It wasn't buried in a tomb. It was just under the sand, like something the wind itself decided to reveal. Some believed it to be a modern hoax, but a scan of the quartz showed micro-weathering across the grooves, something that doesn't happen overnight, or even over centuries. It would take thousands of years for that kind of erosion to occur, and the quartz was local to the Sahara, not imported, not modern. When light passed through the panel at certain angles, something stranger emerged. The grooves lit up, faintly but visibly. Lines would glow, only under very specific wavelengths, not all of them at once, almost like the crystal was filtering or reacting to the sun, or moonlight. One researcher compared the pattern to an ancient star chart, and that's when things started to align. Literally. The angles on the crystal weren't arbitrary. They matched the positions of known star systems, but not from our current night sky, from 10,000 years ago. In other words, whoever carved the quartz, if it was carved, had knowledge of the heavens as they appeared before recorded Egyptian history even began. And here's what's even more unsettling. When they overlaid the quartz with satellite imagery of the area, some of the lines matched the surrounding landscape. The crystal's curves mirrored the ridgelines of buried formations beneath the sand, elevations, dry riverbeds, even what might have once been lakes. It was a map, not of Egypt today, but of what it might have looked like before the Sahara became a desert. And here's the strangest part. Some of the crystal grooves pointed outward, far beyond Egypt, toward Ethiopia, toward the Red Sea, toward places not yet excavated, as if whoever made this had seen it all, from the sky. But how could they? There are no surviving tools in ancient Egypt capable of etching this level of detail into quartz. No lenses, no rotary carving equipment, and no reason to make something this detailed, unless it had a purpose. Could this be an artifact from a lost civilization, one that predates even dynastic Egypt? And if so, why is it buried near the Siwa oasis? That oasis itself holds many secrets. Alexander the Great once sought the oracle there. Locals speak of temples swallowed whole by sandstorms, entire sections of the desert where electronics short out, and people go missing. Some geologists believe that beneath that region lies a vast aquifer, a hidden sea. Could this crystal map have been a tool to track underground water, or a memory of what once existed there? One theory is that the quartz panel isn't a map of land at all, but of energy lines, paths of vibration or magnetism long forgotten. Modern scientists struggle to prove this, but some of the crystal's points do intersect with areas where animals refuse to settle, or where strange EM anomalies have been reported. Another theory connects it to the stars, not just in alignment, but as a message. Some of the grooves seem to correspond with dates tied to lunar eclipses or stellar events. Why? We don't know, but whoever made it, if they were human, understood time and space in a way our textbooks never accounted for. They knew the shape of the earth, the curvature of land, the positions of celestial bodies, and maybe even the rise and fall of water. This wasn't decorative, it was functional, but the function has been lost. The fragments were removed and taken for study. Some are on display, others are sealed in private archives. The largest piece remains unaccounted for, possibly still under the sand, or in someone's collection. But what remains behind is the idea that somewhere out there, beneath the Sahara, there might have once been a city, not of gold or stone, but of light, glass, and starlight knowledge. And this quartz fragment might have been its key. The telescope tube in the tomb. In the far corner of a tomb sealed for over 2,000 years, buried beneath centuries of dust and crumbled limestone, something strange was found. It wasn't a scroll, it wasn't gold or a statue, it was a tube. Long, heavy, smooth, carefully carved from a dark, glassy stone. It wasn't decorated with symbols or names, no hieroglyphs, no markings, just a perfectly cylindrical shaft, capped on both ends, with lenses. It took the excavation team days just to realize what they were holding. At first glance, it looked like a ceremonial baton or part of a staff, but when one researcher held it up to the light, accidentally pointing it toward a torch, the beam refracted, bent, focused, just like a telescope, but this was impossible. The tomb itself was dated to around 300 BCE, still within the Ptolemaic period of Egypt. That's 2 millennia before Galileo would build the first known telescope in Europe, and yet this stone object behaved exactly like one. It magnified, it aligned, and when cleaned and stabilized, it could still focus distant light to a point, perfectly. How was it made? The stone appeared to be obsidian, volcanic glass, dense, but workable. The ends were fitted with convex and concave lenses, suggesting knowledge of optics that should not have existed at the time. Even more puzzling, the interior of the tube was hollowed out with impossible precision, a uniform diameter throughout its length, no tool marks, no uneven surfaces, and both ends were sealed with what seemed like natural crystal, ground into lens shapes and fused in place. Not glued, fused. Engineers who examined the object later couldn't figure out how it was shaped. They said the tools required would have to include something like a lathe, or at the very least, an understanding of lens grinding. But ancient Egypt, as far as mainstream archaeology is concerned, had no such knowledge. They built pyramids, they carved granite with copper tools. They didn't understand refractive light physics, or did they? In the same tomb, they found an oddly detailed wall carving, what appeared to be a person holding the same object, aiming it at the sky, not down, not across, up. Was it symbolic? Was it a ceremonial object for communicating with the stars? Or was it practical, because the alignment of the tomb itself suggested something else? The burial chamber was constructed with a narrow shaft piercing the ceiling, not wide enough for a person to pass through, just wide enough for a beam of light, or a glimpse of the heavens. And this shaft was angled, perfectly matched to the position of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, as it would have appeared over Egypt around 300 BCE. Someone built this place with precision, with intent, and this object, the tube, was placed directly beneath that shaft, as if it were part of the design. Could it have been used to track stars, to observe lunar phases, or maybe something even stranger, used only on a single night, during a rare alignment, to see something we still don't understand? The earliest confirmed lenses in human history date back to Mesopotamia, crude, rounded pieces of quartz. But this was deliberate, engineered, and it wasn't the only one. In recent years, archaeologists working in nearby necropolises have discovered small polished crystal discs, some no wider than a coin, convex on one side, flat on the other. When tested, they refract light almost perfectly. These objects were previously labeled as decorative, but more and more experts now believe they were optical components. Were ancient Egyptians experimenting with magnification, with viewing the stars, or perhaps even focusing sunlight, as some ancient lenses may have done, for unknown purposes? Some believe these objects were part of rituals where priests or astronomers used light to signal or align sacred events. Others suspect that the knowledge of optics may have come from even earlier sources, pre-dynastic ones, now lost to time. There's even a theory that the Eye of Horus, a central symbol in Egyptian mythology, is not just a metaphor for protection and vision, but a literal reference to a viewing device, a seeing eye, something that watched the skies. Ancient texts mention star charts, planetary cycles, and even visitors from the stars who knew the heavens. Were these poetic ideas, or evidence of a forgotten branch of science? This tube, now stored in a climate-controlled vault, continues to raise questions. Why seal it away in a tomb? Why build a structure to aim it at the sky? Why include no inscriptions, unless the device itself was the message? And perhaps most haunting of all, what were they trying to see? Because whoever built it didn't just understand stone, they understood glass, light, and time. Maybe it was a telescope. Maybe it was a signal. Maybe it was something else entirely. But one thing is clear, this wasn't just a ceremonial object, it was engineered, and it didn't belong in our version of history. The torch that burned cold. In the quiet halls of the Dendera temple complex, deep within the sacred lands of ancient Egypt, there is a corridor few have entered, and even fewer have understood. On its weathered stone walls, untouched by time, flood, or flame, rests a depiction that defies explanation. It shows a large, bulb-like object. Inside this bulb, a serpent curves and coils, its tail at the base, its head rising into a flower-shaped end. The bulb itself connects to a box-like device, and nearby, a figure holds it, steady, almost reverently, as if the light it produces is both sacred and essential. To the trained eye of the modern world, it looks like a light bulb, but not just any light bulb. What if I told you this wasn't just a symbol, that what you're seeing might have actually worked? And what if I told you it didn't burn hot? It burned cold. What does it mean to burn cold? In modern science, plasma is known as the fourth state of matter, beyond solid, liquid, and gas. Plasma is what stars are made of, what our sun produces, and what powers neon lights and fusion experiments. But there is such a thing as cold plasma, a form of ionized gas that glows without generating dangerous heat. Now imagine cold plasma in ancient Egypt. It shouldn't be possible, but then again, this entire image shouldn't be there. The carving is part of a set of reliefs found in a chamber beneath the Hathor temple at Dendera. These are not public-facing images, not decorations meant for crowds. They are hidden, tucked away like a secret not meant to be shared lightly. This wasn't painted hastily, or carved by error. The symmetry, the precision, and the recurrence of the motif all suggest one thing. This was intentional. Theories began to emerge in the late 20th century. Could the ancient Egyptians have known a form of electrotech? Could they have stumbled onto a way of generating light that we're only now beginning to rediscover in laboratories? Of course, Orthodox Egyptologists offer alternate views. They say it's symbolic, that the bulb represents a lotus flower, that the serpent is a manifestation of the life force rising through the spine of creation, that it is all metaphor. But metaphor doesn't hum. Metaphor doesn't leave behind mineral discoloration that's consistent with electromagnetic exposure. Metaphor doesn't show connection to copper plates or junction boxes, also found buried in the same temple, in sealed compartments. Some of those compartments had scorch marks inside them, yet the walls were untouched. Imagine walking into that underground chamber 3,000 years ago. The air still, the stone cool beneath your feet. A priest steps forward, holding a glassy serpent-filled torch, and instead of flame, it gives off a soft, cold light. A glow that doesn't flicker. A light that casts no shadow, no smoke, no fire, no heat, only radiance and silence. Now let's zoom out, because this isn't the only clue. Across ancient Egypt, we've found inexplicable patterns. In some tombs, there are no soot marks on ceilings, despite being built before known oil lamps. In others, statues show figures holding objects that resemble modern-day handles, wires, even sockets. In one particularly odd fragment, two artisans seem to be adjusting the base of a bulb-shaped device, while another figure stands guard. Could it be a technology passed through generations but never understood? Could it have been lost and misinterpreted by future dynasties, or perhaps never meant to be remembered? Some have tried to replicate the Dendera bulb design. In a now famous experiment, an engineer built a scale replica of the carving, using an evacuated glass bulb, a filament, and a primitive battery based on Egyptian Baghdad battery designs. He generated light, real, working, usable light. Was it perfect? No, but it worked, and it didn't burn hot. There's another mystery tucked inside this chamber. In a nearby inscription, barely a sentence, there is mention of a device known only as the Eye of the Horizon. It is never shown again. What was it? Was it a name for this light source? Or something more? If the Dendera carving is indeed a form of technology, it changes more than just the timeline of science. It changes our understanding of memory itself, because it means that human beings once knew this, and then forgot. It suggests a cycle, a rise and a fall. A time when knowledge grew far past what we imagine for those civilizations, and then was hidden, buried, or forbidden. And that is a pattern we've seen before. In every collapsed culture, in every whispered legend, and in every sealed tomb with no light, yet walls covered in perfect unburnt pigment. Of course, many questions remain unanswered. If this was real, where are the wires? Why haven't we found a full working device? What power source could they have possibly used? The Nile, piezoelectric stones, some unknown form of chemical alchemy? We don't know, but the torch is there, carved in stone, over and over again. The serpent, inside the light. Maybe it was symbolic, maybe it was religious, or maybe it was both, because in ancient times the line between science and spirit was thinner than we remember. What today we would call technology, they may have considered sacred, a gift of the gods, a mystery of light, and maybe, just maybe, they kept it hidden on purpose, because the most powerful lights burn quietly, the brightest knowledge glows but doesn't burn. The oldest wisdom wasn't meant to be found until we were ready. And now, as we step into that quiet temple, with eyes wide and heart still, we find ourselves looking not just at the past, but at a future once forgotten, a light that burns cold, a torch that never went out. The tunnel, with magnetic walls. There's something strange about the desert, not just its endless sand or ancient ruins buried beneath it, but the silence that seems to hum just beneath the surface. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but charged, like something is waiting. In the western desert of Egypt, away from the Nile's reach and beyond the predictable tourist routes, there's a tunnel. You won't find it on maps, it doesn't have a name. In fact, very few people are even allowed to speak about it. They found it by accident, not with a shovel but with a scan. In 2016, a team of geophysicists from Cairo University were conducting routine magnetic surveys near a cluster of old excavation zones. They were mapping underground formations using highly sensitive magnetometers, standard practice to detect buried chambers, rock voids, or old faults in the earth. But one of their scans returned something unusual, a line of magnetic fluctuation that seemed too linear, too precise to be natural. The signal ran straight across nearly 300 meters, then dipped into the earth at a clean, sloping angle, cutting directly beneath a small ridge that showed no signs of any man-made structure above it. It looked like a tunnel that twisted under the rock like a buried vein. But the magnetic field wasn't just a signal, it was moving. Day after day, the team recorded odd fluctuations. The readings weren't stable. They would intensify at night. Some days the magnetism spiked for a few minutes, then dropped off entirely. On others, it formed a kind of pulse, steady, rhythmic, as if something deeper was humming, vibrating, or reacting beneath the surface. It didn't make sense. Magnetic fields don't behave like that unless they're being influenced by materials, by energy, or by design. They dug a little, not much, just enough to confirm what they'd seen. Less than 3 meters beneath the sand, they found the entrance. It wasn't a cave or a break in the rock. It was a doorway, blocked by a perfectly cut slab, half buried in compacted sand. The stone had no visible markings, no hieroglyphs, no carvings, but when they brushed it off, something bizarre happened. Their compasses stopped working. One of the metal detection tools they were using began beeping rapidly, then shut off completely. The batteries were fine. The device itself was fried. All it had done was come near the stone. Within 24 hours, their permit was pulled. Officially, the site had become restricted. The team was told it was for safety, unstable terrain, unpredictable readings, risk of collapse. But unofficially, the rumors spread fast. Some say a military team arrived the next day, equipped not with brushes and tools but shielding gear and high-frequency scanning arrays. Others say the entire ridge was roped off, with electronic jammers set up to block GPS signals. Nothing about that is normal for a dig site. What were they trying to keep hidden? Let's go back for a moment. This isn't the first time the Western Desert has given up strange secrets. Near Baharia Oasis, for example, archaeologists uncovered entire necropolises buried in untouched sand, some containing skeletons with gold-plated masks and materials that didn't match the timeline. Elsewhere, old Roman outposts dot the edges of the desert. Stone remains with mosaics and storage rooms still intact. But nowhere have we ever found magnetic anomalies tied to constructed tunnels, at least not officially. You have to ask, what kind of material causes that kind of magnetic fluctuation? Some theories suggest iron-rich basalt, but that wouldn't explain the structured tunnel shape. Others have proposed meteoric influence, maybe a buried nickel-iron fragment from a long-forgotten impact, but those options ignore the real issue, the geometry. From satellite thermal imaging conducted before the site was shut down, some leaked overlays suggest the tunnel bends at a consistent, non-natural angle. That's hard to explain. Nature doesn't build straight lines, so who did, and why? There's another detail that rarely gets mentioned. Just 1.2 kilometers from the entrance lies an old ruin site, previously catalogued but never fully explored. It's marked in some records as simply Site 11 West. Within that ruin, fragments of pottery embedded with metallic flakes, possibly used for conductivity. One fragment, when examined under spectrometry, showed traces of tellurium and rare earth elements. Unusual? Extremely. But is it connected? That's the question. And then there's the sound. Yes. Sound. In the final week before the team was pulled from the site, they dropped a geophone mic into one of the small shafts nearby. They wanted to capture ambient seismic noise to better model the subsurface. But when they reviewed the recordings, they didn't hear silence. They heard a hum, a deep, constant hum, at 18.3 hertz. That number is important. It's just below the threshold of human hearing, classified as infrasound, the same frequency detected during volcanic tremors, the same frequency that causes feelings of anxiety, unease, even hallucinations. Could the tunnel be producing this frequency? Could it be intentional? Here's where the theories begin. Some researchers believe this tunnel, if that's what it truly is not merely a passage, but part of a much older system, a network of channels, chambers, and possibly energy distribution points beneath Egypt's desert, a kind of power grid, not in the electrical sense, but in the acoustic or magnetic sense, built to resonate, to amplify, to contain. They point to similar anomalies near Abydos, places where ancient stone structures seem designed to resonate, where sound, light, and vibration were used in ways we still don't understand. Others go further. They propose that the tunnel predates dynastic Egypt entirely, that it was built by an earlier civilization, one erased not by time, but by decision, covered up, hidden. A civilization that understood not just architecture, but field manipulation, that knew how to bend magnetism, sound, and material to serve purposes we can barely comprehend. Think about that, a tunnel beneath the desert, built with precision, emitting a magnetic field that interferes with electronics, producing infrasound, and possibly connected to materials found nowhere else in the region. Why haven't we heard about this in the news? Because access is restricted, reports are buried, the data, what little exists, is fragmented, redacted, or quietly removed. But every now and then someone leaks a scan, a photo, a whisper, something that says there's more beneath the sand. So what now? What happens to a mystery when it's hidden in plain sight? Maybe someday the tunnel will be opened. Maybe the door will slide back, and we'll find a chamber unlike any in Egypt. One without hieroglyphs, without statues, without gods, just machines, or instruments, or things we've forgotten how to use. Or maybe, we'll never be allowed in. And the magnetic hum beneath the desert will continue, just out of reach, just beyond what we're allowed to see, waiting, still pulsing, as if something down there remembers. The DNA vials from Abydos. There are places on Earth where history folds in on itself, where the sands don't just bury artifacts, but silence them. Abydos is one of those places. Tucked deep in the arid landscape of Egypt, this ancient necropolis has long been revered as a burial site of kings, gods, and legends. Most come here seeking relics tied to Osiris, the god of the afterlife. But in 2023, a different kind of discovery emerged from beneath the surface. Not a statue, not a scroll, but a set of black glass-like vials, sealed, forgotten, and strange. They were found in a collapsed chamber just behind the temple walls, wedged between slabs that bore no inscriptions, no offerings, no signs of ritual, just stone and silence. The team that uncovered them didn't expect anything unusual. They were logging a series of broken canopic jars, the kind traditionally used to store organs of the dead during mummification. But these were different. For one thing, they weren't clay. The surface was glossy, almost obsidian in appearance, and cool to the touch. Each vial was palm-sized, perfectly cylindrical, and sealed with a hardened black wax. And when examined under light, faint etchings could be seen, so faint they didn't appear to be carved, but layered into the material itself, like some sort of microscopic code. There were 12 vials in total, hidden inside a stone container that looked far newer than the tomb surrounding it, and the residue inside them. That's where the mystery deepens. In a laboratory in Cairo, early spectrometry revealed something bizarre. The substance wasn't any resin, oil, or embalming fluid known to ancient Egypt. In fact, it wasn't any known organic material at all. Initial tests failed to classify it, so a more detailed chemical breakdown was ordered. What came back stunned the researchers. The vials contained fragments of DNA, fragments not matching any known species on Earth, and these weren't just degraded samples. They were clean, preserved, as if the vials had been engineered for this purpose. Inside them, amino acids were intact, molecular chains undamaged. This wasn't simply old material stored for spiritual purposes. It was collected, it was stored, with precision. The implications ripple far and wide. Why would anyone in ancient Egypt, or any era, possess a way to preserve DNA in such a stable form? Our own modern laboratories struggle to store organic samples for more than a few decades without degradation. These vials were sealed over 3,000 years ago, if the dating is even correct. And the dating is another enigma. The chamber where the vials were found predates most of the New Kingdom structures around it. But the wax sealant used, it contains traces of synthetic hydrocarbons. That shouldn't be possible in a Bronze Age context. So, who put them there? There are two prevailing theories among researchers. The first is cautious. It suggests the vials may have been planted much later, possibly during the Greco-Roman period, or even the 19th century. But this theory is slowly crumbling. The surrounding chamber shows no evidence of modern intrusion, no tool marks, no sand displacement, nothing to suggest anyone had entered or disturbed the chamber since its original sealing. The dust patterns alone support its untouched status for millennia. The second theory is the one few are willing to state on record, but many whisper off-camera that the material is evidence of advanced biostorage knowledge long before our current civilization. Not just lost knowledge, but something inserted into human history, then buried deliberately, far from the eyes of the curious. The location adds to the weight of this. Abydos isn't just another tomb complex. It's the site of the so-called Osirian, a megalithic structure unlike any other in Egypt. While most Egyptian architecture is elegant and linear, the Osirian is massive, megalithic and strangely primitive, as if built by an older, unknown hand. And now, mere meters away, we've found DNA vials with no known origin. One of the archaeologists, off record, said it felt like someone left a message in a bottle, a biological message. But if it's a message, what does it say? Under electron microscopy, researchers found that the DNA inside the vials appears to be a recombinant strand, blending attributes from known Earth-based genetics with anomalies. Sequences that don't exist in any modern species cataloged in our databases. This isn't animal DNA. It's not plant-based either. Some have floated the term synthetic life code. Others believe it's an ancient experiment, a prototype for cloning, perhaps. But the lab technicians found something else chilling. There were pairs. 6 of the 12 vials had matching complementary strands, like keys and locks. One half of the sequence incomplete without the other. And yet, no tomb, no inscription, no known text in Egyptology mentions anything like it. No gods bearing such tools. No myths about storing the essence of life this way. Which leads us to ask, did the ancient Egyptians even know what they were hiding, or were they simply guardians of something they themselves didn't understand? The sarcophagus in the chamber bore no hieroglyphs, no name, no title, just a blank slab, like a placeholder. But directly above it was a narrow vent cut into the ceiling, one that aligned with the stars. Not just a star, but Sirius, the star most associated with Osiris, the bringer of rebirth, the god of resurrection. Could these vials have been part of some forgotten ritual, a way to preserve not organs, but the blueprint of a being? And what being? Let's imagine for a moment, without assumption. Suppose a civilization existed far before dynastic Egypt, one with knowledge of bioengineering, astronomy, and preservation. Suppose they understood DNA, not in theory, but in practice. And that for some reason they buried these tools in the very temple that future Egyptians would come to worship as the gateway to the underworld. Not for reverence, but for safekeeping. These vials were not scattered across the landscape. They were placed together deliberately beneath layers of concealment, as if someone knew they'd be needed someday, but not yet. One of the scientists working on the vials remarked, "We're not studying Egyptology anymore. We're studying something that used Egypt as a canvas." And that idea, the possibility that what we call ancient is merely the residue of something even older, refuses to fade. The Abydos vials remain locked away in an undisclosed location now. Access is limited. No public photos have been released, and inquiries go unanswered. It's as if the moment the results turned inexplicable, silence was the only acceptable answer. But for those who look deeper, for those who feel the pull of these unsolved mysteries, the DNA vials of Abydos represent something more than science, more than history. They are a whisper from a past we have yet to understand, a sealed code, a suspended story, waiting patiently to be read. The paint that still glows. Somewhere deep beneath layers of stone and sand, hidden from sunlight for thousands of years, lies a tomb that has remained sealed for most of recorded history. Its walls are silent, the air inside is still, but when modern archaeologists finally cracked open the stone door and stepped inside, they noticed something impossible. In the darkness before their flashlights even fully illuminated the room, some of the murals on the walls glowed, faintly, softly, as if the past itself still breathed in this chamber. No electricity, no external light source, and yet pigments embedded in the paint shimmered faintly in hues of blue and green, like the final ember of a star that refuses to die. It was more than just surprising, it defied explanation. This isn't the kind of glow that comes from reflected light, it's phosphorescence, meaning the walls themselves were emitting a gentle ghostly glow, and they were doing it in total darkness. But how? The tomb is located near Deir el-Medina, a workers' village on the west bank of the Nile, not far from the Valley of the Kings, known for intricate art, careful craftsmanship, and the precision of those who built the royal tombs. The artists of Deir el-Medina were clearly skilled, but even their most advanced techniques shouldn't have allowed this kind of glow to persist for more than 3,000 years. And yet here it was, before modern scientists, glowing right in front of them. As researchers began testing samples from the wall, they discovered something even more unusual. The pigment used in these glowing areas didn't match any standard mineral paint from ancient Egypt. It wasn't the usual mixture of ochres, charcoal, gypsum, or malachite. Instead, the glowing paint contained microscopic traces of compounds that aren't native to Egypt at all, rare earth elements like europium and strontium, materials associated today with luminescent technologies, phosphors, and even advanced ceramics. So how did these materials end up in a sealed tomb painted over 3,000 years ago? One theory suggests trade, that perhaps by some ancient miracle, these rare elements found their way from distant lands into the hands of Egyptian artisans who didn't fully understand their properties, but used them nonetheless. But another theory is far stranger. Some researchers began to wonder if this was no accident at all, that maybe, just maybe, the ancient Egyptians, or at least a secretive class among them, knew exactly what they were doing. Throughout ancient Egyptian texts, the priests and scribes spoke of a divine light used in temple rituals. They wrote of paints that had to be mixed under the stars, and walls that held the breath of the gods. At the time, scholars thought this was all metaphor. But now, maybe not. What if this was literal? What if the rituals weren't just symbolic, but scientific? What if the pigments were designed to store solar energy during the day and emit it slowly at night, like a slow-burning lamp, hidden in stone? Here's where things get even more strange. In another tomb, far south near Edfu, archaeologists discovered an incomplete wall mural. It was clearly unfinished. Only some of the figures had been painted, the rest left blank. But in total darkness, under ultraviolet light, outlines of the unfinished sections appeared, as if someone had painted them using invisible ink, an ink that only reveals itself under very specific conditions. Why? Was it meant for the eyes of the gods only? Or was it part of some secret instruction for initiates, those who knew how to see in darkness? Think about this. Today we use phosphorescent and luminescent materials for a variety of technologies, watches, emergency signs, even scientific equipment. These are complex compounds. They take serious knowledge of chemistry to produce. Yet here, in a tomb sealed for 30 centuries, this same phenomenon occurs, naturally, persistently, without degradation. There's no sign of solar panels, no trace of electric wiring, just stone, silence, and a glow that no one can quite explain. Some ancient astronaut theorists have jumped on this, claiming that this is evidence of alien knowledge, technology gifted from above. But even without invoking extraterrestrials, the mystery holds, because even if this was entirely human-made, it still doesn't fit the timeline. Advanced phosphorescent chemistry shouldn't exist until the 17th or 18th century CE. This tomb was sealed more than 3,000 years ago. So the question stands, did the ancient Egyptians possess a kind of scientific knowledge that we've completely lost? Or were these effects, these glowing paints and invisible inks, accidental side effects of mineral use, stumbled upon, but never fully understood? Some scholars have suggested that it might have been the result of alchemical recipes passed down orally, traditions of pigment preparation that included strange requirements. Grind the stone only beneath the new moon. Let the mixture rest in the temple shadows for 3 days. Speak no words during the mixing. It all sounds mythical, even ridiculous, until you realize that such instructions might be encoding something deeper. Observations about temperature, exposure to air, even bioluminescent bacteria reacting to environmental changes. A kind of ancient chemistry, hidden in ritual. Back in the glowing chamber, scientists noticed one final detail. The phosphorescent areas on the wall weren't random. They formed specific shapes, celestial symbols, star maps, and what appeared to be an abstract depiction of the afterlife's journey. But only part of the journey glowed. The rest remained dark, as if the wall was guiding the soul with light, like a spiritual map designed to be read not in daylight, but in the total darkness of death. It's haunting, and it makes you wonder, how much did the ancients really understand? Because if the pigments still glow after 3,000 years, how many more chambers like this lie undisturbed beneath the sand? How many murals still sleep beneath sealed doors, waiting for someone to notice, not the paint itself, but what the paint can do? The ancients may not have had our electricity, but maybe they didn't need it. Maybe they understood something even more fundamental. That light, even a faint glow, can outlast empires. The hole cut by no tool. When we think of ancient construction, we imagine hammers, chisels, copper tools slowly scraping at stone, year after year. But sometimes, just sometimes, we find something so precise, so clean, so impossible, that every explanation we've ever accepted suddenly begins to crumble. Buried in the granite bedrock of Egypt, not far from the quarries where ancient builders harvested stone for temples and tombs, lies a hole. Just a hole, at first glance. Small, neat, cylindrical, tilted at a slight angle. But this is no ordinary hole. It isn't chipped or cracked. It isn't jagged or rough. It looks as though it were cut with a modern core drill. Yet the civilization that left it behind supposedly had nothing more advanced than copper chisels. Let's pause on that. Granite, one of the hardest natural stones, rates about a 6.5 to 7 on the Mohs scale of hardness. Copper, the tool material used in ancient Egypt, just 3. That's not even close. You can't scratch a diamond with your fingernail, and in the same way, you can't expect copper to efficiently cut through granite without leaving a mess. And yet here it is, a hole, perfectly smooth, as if a machine had passed through. The first person to document this mystery was Sir William Flinders Petrie, widely considered the father of modern Egyptology. In the late 1800s, while exploring the site of Abu Roash and again at Giza, he found odd spiral-shaped tool marks etched into solid granite blocks. He called them machine marks. His notes mention a level of pressure and speed of cutting that copper tools simply couldn't replicate, not without the tool melting first. Even Petrie, working without an agenda, couldn't make sense of it. He measured the striations inside the hole, the fine lines left behind by the tool, and noted something eerie. They were evenly spaced, not random, not messy, like you'd expect from a hammer and chisel job. More like what you'd see from an industrial lathe. Only, industrial lathes didn't exist in 2500 BCE. So what created this? Some researchers proposed that maybe sand was used as an abrasive. Mix copper tubes with sand, spin it around, add elbow grease, and over enough time, maybe, just maybe, you could bore into granite. But here's the thing. Even using that method today, with all our understanding and precision, the hole doesn't turn out as clean. The grooves aren't symmetrical, the walls aren't that smooth, and the depth achieved by the ancients? It's deeper than what that method can replicate without years of continuous labor. And the downward angle? That's the final nail. It's much harder to bore diagonally through granite than straight down. Gravity works against you, tools slip, sand doesn't stay in place. You'd need constant stabilization, constant pressure. In other words, you'd need a machine. And according to what we've been told, ancient Egyptians didn't have machines. But let's think for a moment, what if they did? Not the kind of machines we use today, but something else. What if they understood a different kind of engineering? Some speculate ultrasonic cutting, where high-frequency sound vibrations break stone at a molecular level. Others suggest advanced alloys, tools made of metals we no longer possess or understand. And then there's the theory of forgotten civilizations. Technologies not passed down but lost, buried beneath the sands, erased by time, flood, or war. The ancient Egyptian timeline is long, but incomplete. Gaps stretch for centuries, dynasties rose and fell, and with them entire libraries of knowledge may have been wiped clean. We don't even know how they built the Great Pyramid with such accuracy. And now, here's a hole. Clean, perfect, impossible. Petrie wasn't alone in his wonder. Modern engineers, people who build spacecraft and precision machinery, have visited this site. Many of them walk away shaking their heads, not because they see aliens, but because they see evidence of a mind that thought differently. One expert in manufacturing said the cut was more accurate than many cuts produced in aerospace factories today. Just think about that. A 4,500-year-old granite core cut that rivals modern aerospace. Let that sink in. There's another strange detail. The debris. In some of these holes, small cores of granite have been found, like corks pulled from a wine bottle. These cores show the same spiral grooves, matching the interior of the holes they came from. But here's the twist. The grooves on the cores advance too quickly. In modern machining, a slow spiral means low pressure and soft materials. A fast spiral means more pressure and a harder, stronger tool. On some ancient granite cores, the spiral grooves descend more than 1 inch per revolution. That would require enormous force, far more than a man turning a copper tube with sand. So, how? Let's talk about context. These holes aren't just in one place. They've been found near Giza, at Aswan, in abandoned quarries, and even beneath other ruins, structures built on top of already ancient foundations. Some speculate these tools may have belonged not to the dynastic Egyptians, but to a culture before them, a people whose records were lost, whose tools were not buried in tombs, but erased by time, whose understanding of geometry, resonance, and materials was simply different than ours. Now, take a step back. This is just one hole, one mark, one mystery. But if this one piece doesn't fit into the puzzle of what we know about ancient Egypt, then how many other pieces are missing too? What else was carved with tools we no longer recognize? Could there have been a science behind their stonework, a physics of vibration, or magnetism, or even sound, that we've only barely begun to rediscover? There's a reason this hole continues to draw attention, because it defies dismissal. It's not a myth, not hearsay, it's physical, it's real. You can touch it, measure it, and yet it doesn't belong in our timeline. It's a silent message, etched into granite, whispering, you are not the first to understand precision. You are not the first to shape stone with impossible skill. You are not the first to lose what was once known. This is just one of many artifacts and anomalies that suggest a deeper layer to Egypt's story. A layer not of aliens, but of us, humans, just like now, but from another age. An age that slipped into shadow, leaving behind only stone to tell the truth. And that truth still echoes through the hole that no tool should have made. The toolkit in the cliff. In the dry, wind-cut cliffs overlooking the Nile's Bend near Theban burial grounds, there lies a forgotten ledge, barely visible from the valley below. The entrance seems no different from any of the hundreds of tombs cut into the desert rock. But this one wasn't meant to be seen. There were no ornate carvings, no guards, no evidence of offerings or funerary rites. Just a smooth opening like someone had melted the rock into shape rather than chiseled it. It took a team of satellite scanners and LiDAR sweeps to even detect the anomaly. The path leading up to the cliff face was long since covered by landslides, and no visible steps remained. When archaeologists finally ascended with drones and rigging, what they found was not a tomb, not a shrine, but a cache. A hidden chamber sealed with such precision that not a grain of sand had crept in over centuries. Inside were objects no one expected, not jewelry, not scrolls, not bones, but tools, real tools, compact, layered, and perfectly arranged within modular racks carved directly into the cliff wall. Some were rod-like, made of unfamiliar metals that resisted modern X-ray identification. Others looked like clamps or tongs, but with flexible joints and coiled hinges so fine, they must have been designed for minute, exact movements. Most striking was a set of blades so sharp that they sliced through ancient papyrus without bending a single fiber. And these weren't ceremonial. There was wear, there were stress fractures. There were micro-deposits of stone powder, suggesting they had been used to cut granite, basalt, and even quartzite. But how? No copper alloy could do that, and certainly not with the precision left behind on these instruments. One of the tools resembled a modern caliper, but it had an embedded tube, possibly hydraulic, and moved with a silent, resistant force, like it was engineered to hold something very, very delicately and perfectly still. Another resembled a tripod, but had magnetic bases, even though magnets as we understand them weren't supposed to exist in Egyptian metallurgy. Then came the inscriptions, not hieroglyphics but etched coordinate grids. Each rack was labeled with geometric notations. Not stories, not prayers, but schematics. Tool names, perhaps. Measurements, instructions, and all of it carved into a dark green alloy, unlike any known bronze or brass. Some scientists speculated it could be a meteoric nickel-iron compound, refined with some lost technique. But here's the deeper mystery: when and why? Carbon dating of the dust inside the chamber showed it had been sealed for over 4,000 years. That puts it earlier than most known pyramids. And yet the sophistication of the toolkit rivals or exceeds what we can manufacture today. The possibility begins to form in the back of your mind. What if this isn't a toolkit from the civilization we call ancient Egypt, but before it? Could this have belonged to a predecessor? A civilization so advanced that their remaining traces were buried deeper than time and sand combined. The instruments also didn't match the tools used to build the tomb they were found in. Nearby, in other tombs, standard copper chisels and stone hammers were common, but not here. It's almost as if this toolkit wasn't used on this tomb, but hidden in it. Safeguarded, sheltered, meant to be preserved rather than displayed. One rod-like device had telescoping arms and a lens on one end, like a probe. Another, shaped like a sphere split in quarters, contained fragments of crystal inside. When light hit it at the right angle, it refracted patterns onto the wall. A mapping device? A directional scanner? Perhaps even a type of portable projector? As speculative as it sounds, several researchers noticed the tools were organized in sequence, like steps in a process. Not just individual devices, but part of a system, a toolkit with a procedure. Was this an engineer's bag, a healer's set, or something else? And then there was the most bizarre object of all. A cube-shaped container with no hinges, no seams, yet when held a certain way and rotated slowly, one side receded, revealing a vacuum-sealed interior that held a black, sponge-like pad. Touching it caused a visible ripple, like the material absorbed kinetic energy. That single artifact was removed and is currently under military lock by the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, pending chemical analysis. But why would a toolkit need energy-absorbing materials? Was this a device for maintenance, repair, or could it be a power interface of some kind? If these tools connected to something larger, something mechanical, structural, even energetic, it opens up implications we're barely prepared to consider. For instance, how did the tools survive intact? Most copper or bronze would corrode or crumble after millennia in a sealed space, especially in fluctuating desert temperatures. But these showed no rust, no oxidation. Some edges were so sharp that when tested on soft stone, they sliced cleanly with almost no pressure. And this raises another question: why hide it? If these tools were valuable, and clearly they were, why bury them at all? And not in a temple or royal tomb, but in a cliff face with no markings. Was someone trying to hide them, or preserve them for a future finder? This isn't the first time tools of strange design have been found. Similar anomalies have shown up in Abydos, Dendera, and even in the subfloors beneath Luxor. But never a full toolkit, never this intact, and never in such deliberate, almost reverent storage. There's even speculation that this cache was only a satellite locker, part of a larger network. You see, the coordinates inscribed on the cliff wall don't correspond to local geography, but when mapped against old star charts, a pattern emerges, an alignment not with places, but with constellations. Were these toolkits placed along a stellar grid? Were they part of a map, or a ritual? Even more chilling, one of the etched star symbols matches the orientation of the Pleiades, as seen 12,000 years ago, long before dynastic Egypt, long before any accepted civilization. So the toolkit in the cliff becomes more than a mystery, it becomes a fingerprint, of knowledge lost, of hands we never knew existed, of minds that understood materials and mechanics in ways we can only guess at today. And the cliff itself, half eroded, half ignored, isn't just a rock face, it's a door. A forgotten chapter, sealed with intention. And what lies behind that door, what those tools were meant to service, shape or save, may still be buried deeper in Egypt's living stone. The coordinates in the cartouche. In the far reaches of Upper Egypt, beneath layers of stone, once warmed by desert sun and choked by centuries of silence, a cartouche was discovered, one that didn't match any pharaoh, god, or known royal lineage. It was etched faintly into limestone, found not in a grand tomb or temple, but in a dusty side chamber few had reason to enter. At first glance it looked like just another nameplate, a forgotten name of a forgotten figure, perhaps erased from the record. But when a team of epigraphers and data analysts quietly studied the sequence of symbols inside this oval border, something changed. The lines weren't poetic, they weren't ornamental, they were mathematical, coordinates, not the kind that pointed to another tomb or city, but the kind that described locations on Earth, latitude, longitude, geospatial notation, in numbers. But how? The cartouche included 3 repeating symbols, looped, angled, intersected, and when transliterated through multiple cipher layers, each symbol matched a numerical value. This wasn't simple symbolic abstraction like the Eye of Ra or the Ankh. These were positional encodings, and more hauntingly, they pointed directly to the Nubian desert, to a patch of land with no known archaeological activity. Satellite imagery later showed slight ground disturbance there, an anomaly in the dunes. Who carved this? No Egyptian dynasty had the conceptual framework for latitude or longitude. That knowledge wouldn't exist for another 2,000 years, and yet here it was, scratched into the side of a wall, alone, ignored, overlooked. The team that found the cartouche debated whether it was authentic, so the stone was tested. No recent tampering, no modern tool signatures. The patina was consistent with ancient surface decay. Then came a stranger clue. A second cartouche, not identical, but structured the same way. Found over 400 kilometers away, embedded in a collapsed structure in the White Desert. Same odd symbols, same math, different numbers. These pointed to a different set of coordinates. This time, deep beneath the Nile. Were these markers? Were they instructions? Or were they warnings? One of the cartouches had a detail not seen in the first, a small etching of concentric circles near its base. To some, this looked like Atlantis mythology, Plato's circular city, but that would be a modern imposition. The team chose not to speculate. Still, there it was, repeating in pattern. The coordinates, when mapped together, formed a triangle. Each point, a site of anomalous readings, one with magnetic interference, another with subsurface voids, and the third, a region long thought to contain buried pre-dynastic ruins swallowed by the desert. These weren't random carvings, they were intentional, precise. And here's where it deepens. When the researchers rotated the map, aligning north not to true north, but to celestial north, the triangle matched the layout of 3 known stars in Orion's belt. Not exactly, but eerily close. This suggests more than mapping. It suggests a fusion of astronomical and geographic knowledge, something no culture in that time period is supposed to have. Something that implies a forgotten science, or a borrowed one. Some claim the cartouche isn't Egyptian at all, that it predates them, that it was absorbed into their architecture, like reused stone, relics inherited from a civilization lost to sand and time. Could this be the remnant of the mysterious builders referenced in the Palermo stone? The unnamed figures said to have ruled before the pharaohs. No human hands should have known these coordinates. No chisels should have carved this pattern. No mind of that era should have grasped both heaven and earth in the same etching. And yet, someone did. A symbol without a name, a code without a cipher, a message passed down without language, but burned into stone. You can almost imagine them, the carvers, standing in silence as they etched those lines, perhaps guided by the stars above or machines we'll never see. Perhaps remembering something they'd once been taught, something they knew would be forgotten, like a memory buried under sand, hoping to surface when the time is right. The symbols sleep now, in the quiet, but the coordinates remain, still pointing, still waiting, still watching. The mirror that sees without light. It was found wrapped in coarse linen, deep inside a collapsed tomb shaft in Saqqara. No inscriptions marked the tomb. No cartouches lined the walls. Just a single granite box, sealed so tightly it had to be lifted out in pieces. Inside, among crumbling papyrus and shards of broken pottery, lay a circular object, smooth, black, and impossibly reflective. It looked like a mirror, but not of polished bronze or gold like those used by nobles. This one had no metal, no backing, just a disc made of an unknown obsidian-like material that absorbed nearly all light and reflected none in daylight. Yet when placed in total darkness, it began to glow faintly. A cold, eerie glow. Not from luminescence, not from heat, but as if it captured something invisible and made it visible, like watching moonlight ripple across still water that isn't there. The archaeologists thought it might be a ritual object, something used by priests, but nothing matched it in museum records. No depiction of it existed in tomb paintings. No mentions in funerary texts. It didn't belong. It was tested. No local stone matched it. Its composition showed high levels of silicon dioxide, but with crystalline patterns found only in impact glass, the kind formed by meteor strikes. Yet this object wasn't broken or jagged, it was smooth, deliberately shaped, cut with a skill that modern machines could replicate, but not ancient chisels, not copper, not stone. And then came the real mystery. When researchers aimed a low-powered infrared laser at the object, it didn't reflect, it refracted. The light bent, not just through but around it, creating a field of distortion behind the disc, like looking through warped glass, except the mirror wasn't transparent, it was opaque. Something wasn't right. A physicist brought in to observe quietly asked, "Are you sure this is ancient?" The carbon dating on the linen wrapping suggested it was over 4,000 years old, but the object itself couldn't be dated. It had no organic material, no way to test its age directly, just its strange geometry, its impossible smoothness, and the way it seemed to respond to being watched. A technician working alone at night reported seeing faint flashes inside the disc, not light, but motion, like shadows behind the glass, only visible when viewed indirectly. The room's ambient sensors recorded minor electromagnetic shifts near the object, too weak to be considered dangerous, but strong enough to register consistently. Soon, people stopped going near it alone. Then someone noticed something truly strange. The mirror showed things behind you, but not like a reflection. It showed them as they were, not as they should appear in a mirror. It was accurate, not reversed, not distorted, but only in total darkness. This broke the laws of optics. Mirrors reverse, always, but not this one. It was as if the disc was not reflecting light, but capturing position, the space around it, the shape of the room, and overlaying it with something else. A version of the space that wasn't always the same. A silent version, a colder version. One researcher compared it to LiDAR, but from a time when humans had no concept of lasers. Another theory emerged quietly, unshared in any publication. What if this object was not a mirror at all, but a sensor? An artifact left by someone not of the Nile, not of Egypt, but from a different time, or perhaps a different mind entirely. The ancient Egyptians might have found it themselves, buried in the sands, rewrapped it, sealed it away. Too powerful to use, too strange to destroy. This might explain why there were no inscriptions in the tomb, no prayers, no names, nothing to bind the object ritually. They didn't try to understand it, they just hid it. One fragment of papyrus found near the mirror had a single phrase, "That which drinks the world but leaves no shadow." No one knew what it meant, but it felt like a warning. The disc now sits in storage, locked away under controlled lighting, not on display, not studied further. The room around it remains colder than others in the same building. No electrical devices are allowed near it anymore. Not after the interference grew strong enough to shut down 2 lights and a climate control panel. To most, it's just an unclassified ritual item. But to those who've seen it up close, it's something else. Not a tool, not a relic, but a question, left behind in a form we barely understand, and perhaps never meant to be found. The skeleton with no tool marks. They found it in the quarry pits near Aswan, where granite for obelisks was once carved from the earth by hand. Workers were restoring the cracked pathways near the unfinished obelisk when a section of stone gave way, revealing a sealed pocket of fine silt. Inside it, nearly upright, was a human skeleton, perfectly preserved. At first it was assumed to be recent, too pristine. The bones weren't calcified or crushed, but the soil around it was untouched. No burial chamber, no coffin, just a sealed, dry cavity formed by natural stone shifting, untouched since the days of the pharaohs. What made it truly unusual wasn't just its condition, it was the fact that nothing nearby could have put it there. The body was embedded at a depth that suggested it had been placed before the granite around it cracked, meaning the skeleton was older than the fractures, older than the quarry work. perhaps even older than the earliest known Egyptian structures in the region. And that wasn't all. The bones showed no tool marks, no signs of trauma, cutting, or excavation, no burial implements, no wrappings, not even the faintest trace of wear from stone tools or human interference, as if the person had somehow ended up inside solid granite, without being buried. Impossible, according to geologists. Granite doesn't form around people. It cools over millions of years, and even if a pocket had opened after formation, the only way to place a body inside would involve breaking through hard rock. Yet there were no chisel scars, no drill points, no seams, just one clean cavity, one intact skeleton. The quarry site was shut down quietly for review. Carbon dating came back, approximately 12,000 years old. That number didn't sit well with anyone. It predated not only Egyptian civilization, but agriculture, prehistoric, pre-pharaonic, pre-everything, and yet the skeletal structure was completely modern. Homo sapiens, not a primitive hominid, not transitional, just human. Then came the strangest detail of all. The skull contained faint impressions, microscopic, of what looked like metallic residue. Not a crown, not jewelry, but internal, around the sinuses and cranial cavity. The shape was delicate, branching, as if something once lined the inside of the skull. Not naturally. When scanned, the bone revealed hairline patterns, like wiring or filament traces, embedded within the upper nasal cavity and reaching toward the frontal lobe. No cultures from 12,000 years ago, anywhere on Earth, are known to have used internal cranial implants, let alone ones leaving behind metal traces. Metallurgists brought in from abroad quietly confirmed the residue contained tantalum and iridium, both extremely rare. Tantalum doesn't oxidize easily. It's used in electronics. Iridium is one of the densest elements on Earth and is commonly found in meteorites. That report was never published. Local authorities labeled the find culturally anomalous and redirected excavation efforts. The skeleton was placed in a secure university archive where it remains unlisted in public records. But those who saw the scans raised quiet questions. Who was this person, and how did they come to rest inside a granite pocket that had not been disturbed for millennia? If they were buried there, how? If they weren't buried, what happened to them? One theory whispered behind closed doors was that the body didn't enter the granite at all. It appeared, not placed, not carried, but simply manifested in a space that hadn't existed yet, like a time fracture, a ripple, as if something had broken through. A few fringe researchers connected it to the first time. Zep Tepi, the mythical era ancient Egyptians spoke of when the gods walked among men, when impossible knowledge was said to have been passed down. But the academic world doesn't touch Zep Tepi, not in serious conversation. Still, when you find a 12,000-year-old skeleton inside a granite pocket with no entry point, no trauma, and metal traces in its skull, what do you call that? A coincidence? Or a relic of something we were never meant to understand? To this day, no official explanation has been published. The pit where it was discovered has since been filled with cement, sealed, quietly forgotten. But if that skeleton had lived in a world before Egypt and carried technology that modern tools struggle to explain, then it's not just history we've forgotten, it's entire timelines. Let me know if you'd like